Right, good morning. Good morning, members. Welcome to the 9th of August committee, a special committee called Bringing You All Back from Your Summer Holidays. Ken, have you motorcycled back from the Seychelles? Or? Right, the first item on the agenda, if I can find it, is apologies for absence. Bill Hanley, who had already made his holiday arrangements when we had this, Ian Huddleston, Jean Warmby, who I know is moving house, Lee Hartstone has to attend a funeral, Andrew Hart and Dermot Murphy. Are we quorate? We are quorate. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of July. I'm happy to move those from the chair as an accurate record. Is anybody seconding that? Has anybody got any questions about the accuracy of the minutes? All those in favour of adopting them? Anyone against? Nope, that's carried. Urgent business. I've not been told of any, but then I've not been here.
No, just that issue with the minerals case.
Okay. We will try, whoever's involved with the minerals case, will try and see whether we can change things around. But you will appreciate that there are other people queuing up to speak as well. So there's a problem there. Public participation occurs as we go along. Declarations of interest. I will be declaring an interest in the Taddington application as the applicant is almost next door to me. And I will leave the meeting for that item on the agenda and Ginny will take the chair. So you will have your chance. Are there any other declarations of interest? Start, Matt.
Yeah, the Section 3 application, the minerals one, as the Director of Natural Solutions at the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, we are the owners of the property next door to that.
Okay.
And we're in regular consultation with the owners.
Okay. And then Ginny?
A declaration on behalf of all of us, I think, that we've received photographs regarding item 10.
Okay, yes, right. Any other declarations of interest? Ken?
Just the agent for item 6 is former National Park Authority employee and known to a number of us, Chair.
Oh, indeed. And just seeing whether there's anybody else in the attendance list that... No. Okay, those are the declarations of interest. Sorry? Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, I didn't see.
These for the same reason as Matt. So,
okay.
As my role as Deputy Director of Wild Landscapes at DWT, we've got an existing relationship with the landholding because we're immediate neighbours of that. Thank you.
I take it you two are merely declaring that situation. You're not saying it's a prejudicial interest.
Derbyshire Wildlife Trust are a party to the existing Section 106 and would be a party to the...
Oh, in that case, you'll have to leave the meeting for that item in that case. Okay, thank you. Right, first item on the agenda are items 6... What? Who's into... What's the problem?
7.
Just thinking about numbers, I think.
It's 7.
Sorry, could you...
Carry on, I think we're just making sure we had enough numbers.
And do we have enough numbers? We do, good, okay. So the first proper item, if I can call it that, on the agenda is items 6 and 7, which we'll take together. It's a planning application followed by a listed building consent for Barker Barn at Moor End, Elton. And we will have speakers on this in due course. You're going to take this, are you, Adam?
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for planning permission and listed building consent for the conversion of Barker Barn, which is just south, which is in the countryside south of Elton. Members remember this application was deferred in March, and the applicant has submitted an amended scheme and a structural survey. And we'll go through the amended plans in a minute. So the overall layout is unchanged, as you can see there. There'll be parking area to the southwest of the barn, with a small curtilage to the rear, with a new underground electric supply and package treatment plant. So that's the existing building, which members saw back in March, and we did drive past it again because we were going in that direction yesterday on the bus. You can see the barn is a limestone field barn with gritstone details and is in quite poor condition now with the roof partially collapsed. So that's the view from the road. And that's the other view looking back. And I'll just move through these as we move further away. Just show it in its setting in the landscape, the limestone plateau. And again, looking back up at it, you see it with the rising ground behind, partly. And again, looking up from the south. Again, in the distance, some power lines in the foreground, but you see the barn in the distance there. Shows it in its setting, it's read by itself in the landscape. So this existing ground floor plan, and it shows the existing walled area to the side with an access. The access will be used, and this area to the side would be expanded to the rear with a wall, which would provide for a parking space, and the package treatment plant there with a small patio area to the rear. The existing field access to the side would be retained. There have been changes to the layout since the previous application was considered. So now, if members remember, the bedrooms were upstairs, but now they're proposed downstairs. So we've had an upside-down house proposed. So the 3 bedrooms would be downstairs in these 2 areas with subdivision to create a bathroom, kitchen diner, and then in the kitchen diner there would be a staircase up to first floor, and this area here would be open space above the kitchen, and then here in the upstairs this would be all open plan living room now. So that's a change and an improvement to the plan form. So we better keep this open arrangement. There have also been amendments to the window and door designs, which again are an improvement. And that's just some details of the stair to show a fairly simple staircase proposed. And also you can see there in the section, the application is now proposing a timber roof structure. So the previous application proposed a steel ridge beam, and now a full timber structure is proposed, which again is an improvement in the materials. That's the existing north elevation. And this elevation, members will remember that there is an alteration proposed to reduce the size of that opening. There is evidence that this may have been a later alteration. The air source heat pump will be tucked into there in the lean-to on the side. So that's the existing rear elevation. And that's proposed, and you see it will be repaired, reusing the existing openings. The roof materials is also proposed now to retain the existing mix, which is an enhancement over the previous proposal. Side west elevation be rebuilt with a small store tucked in there. And then from the front, see, repaired using the existing openings. And that's the section there. So you can see the roof structure there, now proposed. No steel beam. And then that's the staircase up to the first floor space in the kitchen. We've also, well, I mentioned we received a structural survey, and drawings have been submitted which visually show the amount of rebuilding that would be required. So we can see parts of the whole roof structure would obviously need to be replaced, but it shows the sections of walls. So these sections of walls on the rear would need to be rebuilt. And on the side, as you members have seen, that part of the building is very significantly collapsed, so there'll be quite significant rebuilding needed there. And on the front, again, this whole part of this elevation would need to be rebuilt. And then we see more localised repairs. So, the Andy scheme is an improvement and would better conserve the building than the scheme the members looked at in March. The structural survey submitted now also evidences the extent of rebuilding required, but it is noted that the surveyor is not care registered. But if permission were granted, then conditions could be imposed to agree a detailed scheme of repair works with temporary support. So that could be the risk of the building needing to be significantly demolished could be mitigated. Nevertheless, there are still concerns about whether the impact of this change of use and the impact it will have upon the significance of the barn and its landscape character. The conservation officer advises that the harm to the setting of the building would be at the high end of less than substantial harm. Now, there would be benefits associated with the development to weigh against that harm with the repair of the building, but the application doesn't demonstrate that the proposed market dwelling would be the optimal viable use of the building. Other uses potentially could secure the building with less harm to the setting of the building. And this is a difficult case. The barn is at risk and investment is required to secure its long-term conservation. However, the barn is by its very nature, as you saw in the photographs, very sensitive to change in terms of its setting. It's a very isolated building in the landscape, and that makes it quite sensitive to residential uses. And there was an appeal decision 30 years ago which considered those issues and did consider there would be harm from any domestication of this building. Therefore, officers on balance recommend refusal for the reasons set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have 2 speakers. Are you going in the order? Is it Colin Swindle first? Hi, Colin. I think you've been here before, so you know what the rules are, don't you? Yes.
Before I begin, Chairman, my speech is just over 3 minutes, but I have applied to speak to both applications. So I'm hoping you'll allow me that a little bit of additional time.
I'm always very flexible in those
Thank you.
circumstances.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I think you're entitled to it, yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, members. Unfortunately, I was back here in March speaking on this application, so part of what I'm going to say is a bit of a repetition, but I do have additional comments to make. So my name is Colin Swindle. I'm a parish councillor for Elton, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the parish council who unanimously and strongly support this application. Barker Barn sits on our moors as an unsightly and dangerous ruin, and for many years residents have watched its slow demise as it becomes an eyesore on our beautiful landscape and open countryside. As a parish councillor of 17 years and the former district councillor for 14 years, I know what my community wants, and they want the barn restored. And members will see this through the many letters of support from local residents. And each of these letters spells out what I've heard from the people of Elton over many years. They want the ruins gone, they want the barn sympathetically restored and turned into a family home and the landscape enhanced. This application does that, and the community and the parish council support it. And it works because I draw members' attention to Sam's Place, Mossy Mere Barn and Emmett's Barn, all less than 1 mile away from where Barker Barn lies. These were all once isolated and redundant barns in the open countryside, left facing a similar fate to that of Barker Barn. But each was converted into a residential dwelling. Each is now a former ruin that has become a family home, with friends and family spending time together in the gardens, a benefit to the local community and enhancing and improving the visual landscape. This is what we want to see for Barker Barn. And to deny it the same opportunity would be inconsistent and grossly unfair. But if not a dwelling, I ask members what other future they can offer for Barker Barn. What alternatives can be offered other than to let it fall into further disrepair and remain a safety concern on our moors? Under the advice of this authority, the applicant has pursued several avenues over many years to bring the barn back into use, such as office space, a camping barn. Ironically, these were all refused by your own planning officers. The report states that converting the barn to a dwelling would harm the significance of a Grade 2 listed building. What could be more harmful than to leave it continue to deteriorate in the countryside? Surely a sympathetic restoration of the barn would be the best way to avoid any further harm. The report claims the development would harm the valued landscape character. Again, the only harm to the landscape would be to allow the status quo to continue. It is the parish council's view that the proposed development is aesthetically pleasing, is sympathetic to the character of the barn, is in keeping with the countryside setting, and will only enhance and improve the landscape of our parish. The parish council and the community of Elton strongly endorse this application, and we ask members to approve it. And if I may, Mr. Chairman and members, I would like to address another aspect within this report. The report makes some rather unfounded allegations towards the applicant through accusations of deliberate and willful neglect of Barker Barn. Having known the applicant Pauline all of my life, I know this to be completely false and such allegations are baseless. I might also add at this point that no such remarks were made in the previous report, which can only mean that the applicant has complied with all of the requests of this authority and there is nothing left to go on apart from her personally. To claim she has done nothing to try and bring the barn back into use is completely inaccurate. Pauline inherited the barn from her uncle, who passed away some decades ago. She has no farm, no livestock to her name, and for Pauline, the barn served absolutely no personal purpose. As I've already mentioned, in the years ahead, after acquiring the barn, she followed the advice of the authority and attempted to find another use for it, only to find that time and time again, following the advice of the Peat Park, she came up against a brick wall with the planning officers. She's even tried to sell the barn on a number of occasions, but unsurprisingly, nobody wants to buy a barn they have no use for. Finally, as close as 2020, Pauline approached and paid the Peat Park for further advice, only to be told months later, after chasing this is not something that they do anymore. So why have no substantial repairs been carried out? One member of this committee asked that very question after I spoke at the March meeting. I'm not sure what world the member lives in, but for a lady who has worked on a modest income all of her life and now in receipt of a pension with very few savings, why on earth could you expect her to throw hundreds of thousands of pounds at a barn that she and nobody else has any use for? But she has spent over £30,000 since acquiring the barn on basic repairs. And as somebody who jogs past this barn almost on a daily basis, I've seen builders there. I've seen Pauline and her husband there trying their best with what they've got to carry out those repairs. Finally, the same member asked why the parish council hasn't taken action to stop the building falling into disrepair. The answer is we have, and even though we have no obligation to do so. The parish council has supported the applicant every step of the way with her varied plans to bring the barn back into use through applications to this authority, and we will continue to do so. So I ask members to perhaps take a step out into the real world and see that the countryside has moved on and progressed with the rest of the world, and this authority needs to modernise its approach to buildings in the open countryside like Barker Barn. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Sarah Foster. Oh, right. We'll do it however you want to do it. Yeah.
Morning, committee. Thank you for letting me speak again on behalf of the applicant. At the last committee, there was a general feeling amongst members that bringing this important building back into viable use as an open market dwelling was something that could be considered favourably and a major public benefit that would overcome any landscape harm as a result of the very small curtilage. It was accepted that other uses were unlikely to offer sufficient viability. I reported to committee back in March that a quote from a local builder simply to put the roof back on, repair stonework and make the building's apertures secure would be in the region of £138,000. I've made numerous attempts since the last committee meeting to contact the authority's FIPL team to find out about grant funding, but none of my calls and messages have been returned. Reading through the details of the FIPL scheme, I don't believe this building would be eligible in any event, given that the owner is neither a farmer nor a land manager. Chris Sim from Peak Engineers will talk more about this building's structural problems and answer any questions, but suffice to say that any reuse of this building is going to necessitate putting the roof back on and partially rebuilding sections of wall as shown on the plan that Adam showed you earlier. There is no suggestion of the barn being entirely rebuilt, and so I dispute paragraph 78 of the committee report. As an experienced planning and heritage profession, I'm somewhat confused by what officers want to see here. The Conservation Officer's most recent response implies that re-roofing and repairing stonework would not be supported. No re-roofing and no repairs suggest that we are moving towards a situation of managed decline where we all have to accept that this building will be lost because that's preferable to reuse. That's certainly not what the local community want to see. It's not a policy requirement for an application of this nature to require a full viability assessment, nor to forensically assess every potential alternative use to the one applied for, and committee accepted this last time. I can go through a few estimates of income for various alternative uses if necessary, but it unsurprisingly serves to demonstrate that things like stabling and camping barns just won't work here. I remind members that Historic England do not advocate a rigid, inflexible approach to listed buildings. They advise that the best way to conserve a building is to keep it in use or to find an appropriate reuse. They go on to say that an unreasonable, inflexible approach will prevent action that could give a building a new life. You will have noted that in terms of the proposed conversion, the report still concludes it would cause less than substantial harm and would offer overall enhancement, allowing this important building to be preserved, and that the revised layout is acceptable and an improvement to the original scheme seen by committee. As I said a few months ago, this may be the last chance for this building, and it has deteriorated even since then. A viable alternative to a dwelling has not been identified in 30 years, despite the continued best efforts of the applicant. Is this scheme that officers say will conserve and enhance the building itself worthy of an approval for the sake of a small rear yard and necessary repairs? On balance, the public benefit seems clear.
Thank you very much. And I've got Mr. Sim. Actually, Sarah, I suspect you might be needed, if you keep yourself handy, just in case we need you later on.
I'm Chris Sim. I'm a chartered structural engineer from Peak Engineers. I have 22 years experience as a structural engineer. I've been working on listed and historic buildings for over... Should I start again?
We can hear you.
Okay. I've been working on listed and historic buildings for over 20 years. As a business, we have nearly 70 years of experience in the structural engineering field. Peak Engineers carried out a structural inspection report on this building earlier this year at the request of the members, and we understand the building's condition has gotten worse in the last few months since we visited in March. There are significant concerns about its safety, and it is our professional opinion that if there is not suitable remedial work carried out soon, then there will be continued exponential deterioration to the historic fabric of the building. The officer's report seems to indicate that we're recommending whole-scale rebuilding of the structure, but this is not the case. The areas of localised repair and rebuilding of walls are not extensive, mainly relating to where the fabric has already deteriorated, and were outlined in the drawings which you've already seen. The areas of repair and rebuilding are required to reinstate the weight of the roof. It is our intention to save the building with minimal intervention, not to rebuild unnecessarily. Regarding comments on the roof of the structure within the report as well, there's very little viable timber remaining in the roof. The parts of the roof that have collapsed are either broken or badly decayed, and we've therefore recommended methods of repair that utilise traditional natural materials and respect the remaining historic fabric. The officers have noted on more than one occasion Peak Engineers are not conservation accredited. Now, this is not a legislative or planning policy requirement, and it should also be noted that it is not a qualification that ensures additional expertise. It's simply a register. It does not necessarily mean that a care registered engineer is better qualified than one who is not care registered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, by all means, Adam. Just probably save me asking the questions.
Yeah, a couple of points. I just wanted to say that we haven't received any applications for other uses such as camping barns and offices. It was mentioned about previous proposals. The last scheme that we had was the scheme for conversion. Obviously, that doesn't mean the applicant hasn't been pursuing alternative uses. Just saying that from the planning history, there haven't been any planning applications. Deliberate neglect was something that was raised by members. I think Ken raised it at the last committee, so that's why I've included that in the report. And I've just to clarify, I'm not alleging whether or not there has been deliberate neglect. The point is that's an issue that members need to think about, because there is a national policy that says if there is evidence of deliberate neglect, then the deteriorated condition of the building should be disregarded. That is national policy, that applies England-wide, and members need to be thinking about that. And it was raised by Ken, so I've included the policy in the section of the report so members can see that. In terms of structural report, I think there was a typo in paragraph 78. I put major structural reports of this nature would likely constitute. I think obviously I've changed my mind while I'm writing that. But I think the point is, was shown on the drawings, the amount of structural works that proposed in the application wouldn't amount to rebuilding, in my view. But there is a risk that obviously once those works commence, that other parts of the building may collapse, and if significant amount of the building did need to be rebuilt, then that is a risk that that might go beyond a conversion. And I mentioned in my presentation, and it's in paragraph 79, that that's a reason to justify a condition that the precise methodology of that work and support while that work goes on is necessary, just to make sure the absolute minimum amount of rebuilding is undertaken. The point about loss of fabric, yes, it's accepted given the condition of the building now. No matter what you did, even if you were to repair it for use as an agricultural building, there will be rebuilding required. That will result in some harm to the significance of the building, because some of that fabric is going to be altered and changed, but that harm would be justified to repair the building. So that in itself isn't a reason for refusal. It's just to make sure that, you know, if members were minded to approve it, that we would be very cautious and careful about how exactly the methodology for that work was carried out.
And that would be a matter of conditions, obviously.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Just picking up the one point about government policy and deliberate neglect, having decided that you must not take account of deliberate neglect, it doesn't lead you anywhere, does it? Because you've actually still got a problem, that you've got a building that you need to decide whether you're going to save or not, which seems to be the bottom line. Can I just analyse a little bit the reasons for refusal so that we can fully understand what we're being asked to do? It starts off with the development would harm the significant... I'm parsing this. I want to understand each phrase as we go along. The development would harm the significance of the barn. Now, we're told in the report that actually the works proposed would be acceptable. So is that right? How would it undermine the... I understand a bit... Well, I'm going to ask about the bit about the setting of the barn, but the actual harm to the barn that makes it refusable. What is that?
Well, I understand what the point you're making. This condition sort of wraps up everything. So there are elements of the conversion which will result in some harm, which is...
But sufficient to justify refusal?
Well, hang on, let me explain, because that's the point I'm getting to. So, for example, the plastering the walls and the works of the floor will result in a degree of harm. I think if that was the only issue and the barn was in a different location, then that wouldn't necessarily form a reason for refusal in itself. But it's part of the balance. And then the other part of the balance is the impact to the setting of the barn, which is the more significant concern. So that's why all of that is wrapped up in reason for refusal, because members have to weigh up all that harm together. It might be certain parts of it could be okay and certain parts of it wasn't okay, but in terms of the round, members have to consider the impact of the totality of the scheme. If that makes sense.
So that's a make weight once you've decided that the setting is adversely affected?
Essentially, yes, yeah.
Okay. And so I'm now trying to fully understand the setting issue, because it seems to me that there are three angles to this, and I'm trying to understand what the implications of each of them are. The first one is this small area of paved garden ground at the back of the barn. The second one is the positioning of cars beside the barn. And the third one is the one which I'm not really understanding, which is that because the barn and the fields were all laid out under an early 19th century Enclosure Act, there is some extra dimension that says we can't do something there. Have I got that right? Those are the three areas.
Essentially, yeah. In terms of the last point about a key aspect of this barn's significance is its history. And its history is entirely related to the landscape upon which it sits. These would have been wastes and they were enclosed under the Enclosure Act. And the history of the building is that this barn was built pretty much at the same time that all that happened. So the setting in which the building sits, which we saw, that expansive setting of fields, is a fundamental part of the history of the barn because it's all interconnected. It was all done at the same time. And that's part of the historical significance of this listed building. And that's, compared to other barns, that's a larger proportion of its significance, if that makes sense. its setting has to be considered in that context.
Members. Ginny?
Whilst I understand and respect the points that the officers are making, I think we've got a straight choice here. This barn is there's either work done on it that is commercially viable, or it's just going to be lost. And in being lost, of course, derelict building like this could easily have somebody removing the stone, stealing the stone. So, you know, the historic elements can be eroded in that way. I think we could work with the applicant to remove the visibility of the domestication of the curtilage with having higher walls maybe, and making it less visible, the domestication around the barn. I'd like to hear what all my other fellow members feel, but you know, we've got a lot of barns, as Kath is going to point out, no doubt, soon. And they're either going to be commercially viable, and you know, it's a lot of money to spend in sympathetically and carefully renovating this barn, or they're going to fall into disrepair. And you know, it's a straight choice, really.
Right. Other members? Ken?
Thank you, Chair. I think Ginny has summed it up. Essentially, that we do appear to be faced with two choices. On the one hand, I welcome the revisions that have been made to the application and the reversal of the interior arrangements. I've got a couple of comments on those in due course. But at the same time, I'm disappointed that we don't seem to have had a significant piece of information about the viability of other uses that would help inform our decision-making process. I don't disagree with the comment that has been made that camping barn or holiday let would be less impactful, but I do wonder the stabling rather would be viable. But I'd like to just see the evidence of what the costs might have been, what the return on investment might have been. I do wonder though whether some light industrial use, which would have, I think, result in a less impactful exterior impact, might be more viable. But we are where we are. For me, the issue remains at a number of levels. We've heard that, and it's been pointed out and emphasised in one of the presentations, that what is being proposed is less than substantial harm. The trouble is that substantial harm is usually understood to be complete demolition, and less than substantial harm ranges from not complete demolition down to changing a few stones. There are degrees within that concept, and our conservation officer, I think, has said that it's at the heavier end of less than substantial than lighter, what is being proposed. I think we're faced again with the issue about a building that has been neglected over the last 30 years. I don't think we can get away from the fact that there's photographic evidence that we've seen previously that it was incomplete. It was completely weatherproof some 30, 35 years ago. It certainly isn't now. Now, yeah, I raised the issue about could this be considered to be deliberate neglect in terms of the MPPF policies, and that's been addressed in the report. But we have to face the fact that in 1990, the planning inspector's decision was that conversion to a dwelling in that location for that building was not appropriate, and the appeal against refusal was not allowed. We're faced with the same thing, but because the building has been neglected, it's now that much more costly to do anything with it. And there is an inevitability about this. I don't deny that we have 2,500 barns in the Peak District. I managed the project that did that work. But what we've got to face up to is that sometimes we aren't going to be able to save all of them. Now, this is a listed building. It is important. It's one of only several thousand listed buildings in the Peak District, but it's been heavily neglected. It is ruinous. And we do, as Ginny has said, have to face up to whether or not the proposals for this building are appropriate in its landscape location. And that landscape location, I think, we have to consider. It isn't in the middle of an enormous area. There's a truncated horizon towards Elton. But as we saw from the, I think, the second or third photographs that Adam showed us, there is a wide-ranging landscape beyond, in the opposite direction to Elton Village, within which this property will be visible. Now, yes, it may be possible to mask some of that. I wondered, for example, whether the car parking arrangement could be at the other end, masked by the building in that truncated horizon, rather than in the exposed other end, for example. But I do think that sometimes we have to face up to the fact that whilst our quite right knee-jerk reaction to trying to secure a building for all good reasons, though bear in mind it is an open market dwelling, it's not affordable or anything like that, it's open market. We have to face up to the fact that sometimes we are going to lose buildings because it's not appropriate to develop them in particular locations, which is why the emphasis on our policies in the past has been on conversion of buildings within settlements, within farmyards, and in some instances, dependent on the topography, within open landscape. But this is a very open landscape, I would suggest, members, and we have to bear that in mind in making our decision. Just one more detailed question I would ask is, there is a difference, because of the changed proposed internal arrangements, there is no longer a proposal to dig out the floor beneath the gritstone, but it is proposed to lift them and reset them. And I would hope that if, for example, if this was approved, that within the context of any conditioning, that we get much more detailed protection of the original surface beneath those gritstones, as they are deemed to be an original feature from the initial construction of the barn. That's a detailed point, Chair, but I refer really to the more general points I've been making in the course of this.
You exceeded your 3 minutes.
I'm aware of that, but I do remember Leslie Roberts telling us that we don't have that restriction, so I rest my case on this occasion.
Right. Any other members wish to contribute? No? Kath?
Thank you, Chair. I think by now everybody knows my position on barns. I think of the men centuries ago hewing that stone, bringing it from quarries far away to create buildings for our animals. We have to live with the times. I'm very sad to see any of our 2,650 barns come to this state, but we are in a position to do something about it. I feel very, very strongly that we should support this application. I hate going round and seeing barns falling into disrepair. It breaks my heart. Having lived next to a quarry all my life, I appreciate stone and what it means to people. And this barn was a beautiful barn that sadly has gone to this state. We have it in our powers to reinstate it into a sensible usage, and therefore I cannot support refusal. Thank you.
Mike?
We come across some difficult decisions on this committee. And I take the points that Ken has made about the steady decline of this building and what it would do in the landscape. But I also disagree with Kath in that there are some barns where the only way you would be able to get them is to lay down a track, probably a quarter or half a mile up some field to get to it. And a number of the barns we come across, you'd only be able to convert them if we agreed to extensions on those barns, which then disfigure them from their original purpose. But rather uniquely with, well, not quite uniquely, but unusually with this one, there is sufficient space within the original stonework to build decent habitable accommodation and still maintain the structure. So I'm moving towards Ginny's position that this is a building you could do something with. I am concerned that we would need to put in conditions to make sure that it was rebuilt, or those bits that need rebuilding were done so to cause absolute minimal harm to the rest of the structure. And like Ken, I was concerned that although the structural engineer has many years of experience, he didn't come with that CARE accreditation.
I don't think that's... I think the point he makes
I
is...
think he's put up a
I think
good,
the point,
good
the point he makes
reasons.
is a fair one.
The man knows what he's doing.
Yes.
If he were to work on this.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Brian, you wanted to say something? Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah. Just coming back to the point that Ginny made about opportunities to disguise and mask domestication. And I know we've looked at that in other cases. I think what I've seen with this case is that we've gone probably as far as we can in terms of the building to achieve a good conservation response. So that's great, thank you. The biggest harm seemed to come from the setting and the addition of the terracing. And I think, you know, if you're in the North York Moors or the Yorkshire Dales or in the Peak District, you know, the thing that we value a lot about the Barns is that very simple relationship to the fields that they sit in. My only thought here was whether there's any further reduction to that terraced area so that we can potentially keep a little area. I think there's a doorway coming out. If we can go to the plan where there's the terrace shown, that one. We understand that there's need for some bins and storage at that side, and there's some need for a smaller sitting out space at that side within this plan. You know, can that very rear, point to it, this section here, could that be brought back so you've actually got a relationship to the field? And that point, it would reduce the amount of amenity space outside. But is that one of the compromises that giving a permission like this would lead to, so that actually we can still enjoy the setting and relationship? And that's one of the things, you know, we've explored uses that don't require a curtilage. Holiday uses sometimes are in that bracket as well. I understand the balances that you're wrestling with, but that was the only other thought that I had. In this case, I don't think it's appropriate to start building walls up to hide domestication. It's all about revealing and enjoying that relationship of the barn and its landscape. So how can we minimise that, and is there scope to go a bit further? Thank you.
Can I be clear about what you're suggesting? Are you suggesting that this should be deferred for discussions on that line, or that we...
To me, it's quite a small point.
Or could that sort of thing be dealt with by condition?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, that could be a reduction in the curtilage, could be dealt with by condition.
And then they can argue about that separately?
Yes.
Okay.
Chair, just if that kind of, if the issue is being considered, what about my suggestion that the car parking should be at the other end of the building to use the building as a mask?
I think we were told yesterday that the parking was probably in the optimum position at the time.
That's, well, to answer your question about procedure, that would be outside the red line boundary, so that's more difficult. Yeah, we couldn't do that by condition, fortunately.
Well, we'd like to come up, Sarah, and then...
We did look at options for putting parking at the other end of the building, but actually we've put it where it is because that's the historic yard that was associated with the barn. So if we put it at the other end, we're creating additional enclosure that didn't exist before this scheme came forward. So it was considered. In some respects, that would be better in terms of visibility, but actually in terms of the historic relationship of the barn to the landscape, it would be worse. My concern about pulling the curtilage in at the top is just that because you have to maintain space for the parking of vehicles, we would end up with a wall that actually
Jiggles.
goes in and out,
Yes,
which again may be more harmful than just a continuous
that
boundary.
actually occurred to me as well.
You potentially could just, if the issue is potentially because the views from the road here, if you brought in this wall slightly to create an edge, then the views from the road, you'd see less of the wall. That could be a smaller change potentially.
I'm getting a sense that members are minded to approve this, but I don't have a motion in front of me at the moment. Oh, sorry. Are you wanting to speak? Or yes. Yes, okay.
Yes. So I'm the district council representative for Elton Parish, and you know this is as Mike said sort of a really difficult decision. I think we need to work out as an authority what the significance is of these sort of listed buildings, because it seems a bit it's listed for its national significance, and all the responsibility for maintaining it seems to be with the person who owns it. I get Cass' point about 2,650 barns which are falling down. Not all of them are going to be listed. If this one is listed, what we've got to do with it is to come up with an alternative use. We shouldn't have been saying to the person who owns it for 30 years, no, you can't do that. It's going to, but you can't let it fall down. That doesn't seem a very reasonable position for us to be taking. What's a viable use? And the viable use that has been come up with is converting into a dwelling. If it's a listed building and we think its listed buildingness is important, we've got to come up with a mechanism for protecting it. And they've come up with a mechanism for protecting it. If we haven't got a better one, if that's not acceptable, we need to come up with a better one, rather than saying, no, you can't do that. It's going to fall down. You can't fall down. It's a listed building. We need to take some responsibility for what's going to happen with that.
I accept that. Martin, did you want to speak, or were you just putting up your hand?
I was going to propose.
Okay, you are proposing. Okay.
Propose that we accept this. I think it's a considerable improvement on the previous one, previous plan that we saw in March, and that this is, and I agree with Matt, that Matt basically said what I would say.
Okay, is that seconded before I call Ken? That's seconded. Right, Ken.
If I may, Chair, just picking up on the point that Matt makes, which are reasonable. But I think what we have to bear in mind is, of course, that when it was listed, it was complete. It was in good nick. It's been neglected for over 30 years, and it's now a shadow of its former self. I think the fairness or unfairness of national legislation is a good point. And it used to be that we had grants available to help owners of listed buildings, as did what is now Historic England. But of course, with the economic downturn over the decades, those sources of funding have dried up. The onus does lie with the owner, unfortunately, and there's very little help that can be given. But I think we have to. One of the problems is that if this, I think, was listed. When was this listed? Do we know, Adam? In the 80s? Or was it back in 67? But it's been listed for decades. But as I say, when it was listed because it was complete. And it has been neglected. Now, whatever we might think about the costs involved, or the approach, the attitude, whatever, nevertheless, what we look at now is not what was listed. That's the only point I would make. I'm not speaking.
Can I just sort of a point on that? The main issue here, though, is about the setting and the relationship. Is about the setting, but the historic setting rather than the physical setting of the relationship. That's what I'm being told, that it's not necessarily what you're looking at, it's the fact that the enclosure award and the field system and the barn were all put together at the same time, seems to be the issue. And actually, if you've not got a barn there, that particular point of the setting argument disappears if it falls down.
Yeah, I take your point, but I think it's not quite as simple as that. I don't think we can divide the physical setting from the historic, because the historic is guided by and is a reflection of the physical. I mean, the way in which those south-facing slopes have been used in the past is because they're south-facing in the main and they get the sunshine. So there's a whole debate elsewhere to be had, perhaps, Chair, but not for this meeting.
Yes, I've got lots of answers to that, but I'm not going to give you them now. Look, I'd like to bring this to a conclusion. Sorry? I want Ginny, and then I want to be told about possible conditions. And Brian wants to say something. Ginny, quickly.
That was what I was going to ask, what conditions would be. And also, we have had recommendations from our archaeologist, so whether they can be included.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a list of conditions that I jotted down, which covers most things, which I'll read out in a second. But just on the point of curtilage, it'd be good to get an understanding of do members consider that the curtilage is proposed is acceptable, or would members want to see a reduction in that?
Right. Well, what is the motion? Is it for as it stands? Well, with the proposed conditions. Yeah.
Okay. So, standard 3-year, and this is for both applications as necessary for development and works. Amended plans, archaeology, written scheme investigation, historic building recording, agree the methodology for structural and repair works, ecology conditions, which was mitigation enhancement measures and specifying lighting, specification for the roof and roof structure, or a specification for plaster finishes, insulation and the floor, as Ken mentioned, specification for mortar mix and joint profile, various design details, underground services, landscaping scheme, just to get the details of what's proposed rather than amend the wall heights, for example, implementation and maintenance of parking, and implementation and maintenance of foul sewage. It's not necessary to remove permitted development rights because it's a listed building. Thank you.
I would certainly like to add into that an amendment regarding curtilage.
Brian is asking that there should be an amendment about the curtilage. Does any member wish to propose that as an amendment? No. Oh, you're doing that as an amendment. Is that seconded? So the changing the curtilage is down as an amendment. I'm going to stop the debate unless there's somebody got anything really urgent to say, and I will put the amendment first.
Chair, in terms of conditions, does that include external lighting?
Yeah, there was one from, yeah.
Right. So the amendment is that the permission, if approved, will include looking again at the detailed curtilage. All those in favour of that amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? Right, that is carried. So the substantive motion is to approve it on the terms read out with that additional condition. All those in favour? Anyone against? Ken? Would you like name recorded? And that was on the planning permission, and I've now got to go through the same thing for the listed building application. Do you want to start the debate again? Right. Can I have a motion for the listed building application on those terms?
Can I propose it
with the amendment? And that's seconded. All those in favour of the listed building application, those against, that is carried. Thank you very much, Sarah, and your colleagues for that, and hopefully we can move forward. I'm going to omit the Oncut application at the moment because we don't have anybody to speak on it, and we have a lot of speakers coming in. And we're going on to Middleton by Yulgrave. I'm a bit worried about this chap from the quarry. It doesn't really need to be here, does it? The Champion Quarry. Is it worth you just going and have a quiet word with him? Just say it's not much point. Because otherwise he's going to be hanging around all day. Right, I'm going to now move on to agenda item 9. Unless, by the way, do any members want a brief break before we move on? No? Okay. Agenda item 9, which is an application for Coldwell End, Middleton by Yulgrave. And who is presenting this? You? Chris Briggs is presenting this one for us. Okay, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Two Castle Cottage is a dwelling located, bear with me, in Middleton by Yorgrave. It's to the north of the village, to the east of the main road.
You need to get nearer the microphone, I
Sorry.
think.
So the dwelling is not listed, but it is considered to be a traditional building, and given its age and architectural style, it's considered to be a non-designated heritage asset. The application is for a single-storey dual-pitched side extension and a link extension between the dwelling and the garage to the rear. The side extension would project approximately 4 metres from the side elevation. The height of the ridge would measure 4.4 metres, and the gable width would measure 5 metres. The side extension would be set in from the front and rear elevations of the dwelling. Okay. So that's a plan of the side extension, rear elevation. That's the porch that is to be demolished as part of the link extension. You can see this single-storey lean-to extension on the side elevation there. That is the link extension, which has a glazed roof behind a parapet wall, which links the dwelling to the garage. Another view of the side extension with the traditional style of windows, which match the host dwelling. So that is the lean-to extension that's on the side elevation of the dwelling. That's to be demolished. The porch is to be demolished, and there's a timber outbuilding between the garage and the porch, which is also to be demolished. That shows the link extension and the side extension with its dual pitch. It's set in from the rear elevation of the dwelling and also the front elevation. You can see a window there on the dwelling that is to be blocked up, and the windows on the side extension there match the windows on the host dwelling. That's a view of the house with the lean-to extension on the side, which is to be demolished. So I'll just go back to the photographs. So that is the lean-to extension that is to be demolished. And you can see in the setting there that the extension would be on the side elevation that fronts the road. So the extensions would be subordinate to the main host dwelling. The size, scale and massing of the extensions are considered to be proportionate. The extensions have a high standard of design and would not result in significant harm to the building, to its traditional form, appearance or heritage significance. The extensions are to be constructed from materials to match the dwelling, with windows and doors to match the dwelling. There would be a limited impact on the character and appearance of the heritage asset, whilst the side extension would be visible from public vantages due to its simple design and use of traditional materials. It would have a limited impact on the setting and significance of the conservation area and would conserve the conservation area. In our view, the proposed extensions accord with the relevant policies and adopted planning guidance, and the application is therefore recommended for conditional approval. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Now, we have a lot of... I'm going to answer them. We have a number of speakers. We have them down here in a list in a particular order. Is that the order you want to speak in, or do you have a different order in mind? Could I go first, please? Right, okay. We'll take you in the order that you want to come out. So, Mrs. Worrell, would you like to come forward? You will find a little button on the speaker, and you will have 3 minutes to address us, but you don't have to speak for 3 minutes. No, please sit down if you feel comfortable. Yes, and make sure the little red light's on at the back of your microphone. Is that on? I can't see from here. Okay, thank you very much. When you're ready.
Good morning, I'm Bev Worrell. I'd like to speak to you today about the objections submitted to the portal and this petition that I'm presenting to you today, complete with a map that highlights the residences of those who have objected. Objections come from 41 different people, mostly from our tiny village. There are 35 objections to the change of character of the cottage. This isn't about the design of the extension or the bricks and mortar. This is about the whole change of character from a charming estate worker's cottage to a large 3-storey house. There are 32 objections to the change in character of the pair of semi-detached cottages. It's not okay for one side of a heritage asset to suddenly expand and dominate the other. They should be of equal stature with harmony and flow. There have been 32 objections to the change in character of the conservation area. The whole character of the village is of moderately sized cottages built for the workers of Middleton Estate. It's exactly what makes our village quaint. There have been 30 objections regarding the change of vista in the village. These are all valuable characteristics, features and landscapes important not only to our village but to visitors too. The report states that the scale of the extension is appropriate and that the use of traditional materials would conserve the conservation area and the main dwelling house. We disagree with that. Traditional materials alone cannot conserve these valuable characteristics and landscapes. Furthermore, 8 people were concerned about the precedent that this would set if passed. Rightly so. The entire village is at risk of losing its charm. 5 people raised the point that buying a cottage and then claiming it wasn't suitable for family life was not exceptional circumstances for such a development. On that basis alone, the application should be refused. The report admits limited impact both on the character and appearance of the heritage asset and on the conservation area, yet we see no heritage statement. Therefore, DMC 5 states clearly that the development should not be permitted. Our duty is to conserve and enhance. Community opinion should count. This heritage asset should be doubly protected by the conservation area and the national park status. Please reject this proposal.
Thank you very much. Are we going back into order again now, or who's speaking next? I've got Mr. Worrell.
Can I hand this petition in?
Yes, by all means.
Do I hand it to Yeah,
I'm not. No, we can sit here. Right, Mr. Worrell, you could understand the rules now, so straight off, please.
Thank you. Chair, councillors, members. The committee's report offers a subjective opinion regarding the proposal's impact on the village views and considers it acceptable. But those who know best are the villagers who see Castle Cottages every day and currently enjoy the views. It's the strong belief of the villagers that the views within the conservation area would be worsened by the proposals. Castle Cottages contribute to important views on entry through and out of the area, and also the long-reaching vista from the square. The Middleton Conservation Area appraisal states that the open grassland in front of Castle Cottages is the focal point of North Middleton. Focal point. It's where every visitor, every resident looks every time. This view is in fact Middleton's grand vista, and Castle Cottages are right in the middle of it. The appraisal states that the development which would not preserve and enhance the valued characteristics of the conservation area will not be permitted, other than in exceptional circumstances. Our views and vista are valued characteristics, and this is demonstrated specifically by 30 named objectors to the proposal's damage to the views. Therefore, this report disregards the conservation area appraisal. Policy DMC5 states development to heritage assets will not be permitted if the character of its setting is adversely protected. The committee's report does not address this policy at all. However, 30 named objectors do. They say the proposal spoils the setting, views from the road and vista from the square. This policy is not satisfied. Policy DMC8 states the applications that affect important views into, across or out of the area should clearly demonstrate how the existing appearance of the conservation area will be preserved and enhanced. The committee's report states that the site extension would not be significantly harmful to the existing views. Therefore, the report admits some harm to the views, which is not preserving or enhancing them, and contrary to DMC8. On the basis of non-compliance to the conservation area appraisal, the Peak Park development management policies, this development shouldn't be permitted, and I ask the committee to sympathise with the villagers, the objectors, and the authority's own policies and reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take Councillor Maelstrom next, if she wants to come forward. Right, we'd like to make sure the lights are on and start. We've done this before, I know.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the District Councillor for this area. My concerns are essentially about preserving the character of the Middleton by Ulgrave Conservation Area. And as you've already heard, obviously there's more to character than the materials used. It's also about preserving the cultural heritage, and I'd refer you in particular to paragraph 25 of the officer's report on this. National planning policy says that great weight must be given to preserving cultural heritage in national parks. There isn't time to go into the history of the cottage, but as you've heard, it's an estate worker's cottage. And building out on one side of a matching pair of cottages by more than 50% of the frontage is going to create a very lopsided effect when you look at the two cottages together. Now, the officer's opinion here is that the extension's not unduly large. Well, you're entitled to disagree with that. Although it's not listed, it's characterised as a heritage asset. So if this cottage is a heritage asset, then next door is also a heritage asset. And the character of that cottage is going to be adversely affected because they're a matching pair. Zooming out slightly and looking at the conservation area as a whole, Again, this extension won't conserve or enhance. It's going to be detrimental. This is one of the most visible properties in Middleton because your eye is drawn to it when you look outwards from the village central square across that field. There's a slight inaccuracy in the officer's report, I would say, where it says that the property is screened by mature planting on the western boundary fronting the highway. And I hope you'll have a good look at the photos of this. The ones in Mr Worrell's letter are particularly good. There are some trees on that side, but where this extension will sit on the western gable is highly visible from the road. In fact, the main view of the cottage from the road will be towards the extension. Middleton by Ilgrave Conservation Area has its own development considerations which don't seem to be mentioned specifically in the report. Paragraph A says, development which would not preserve and where possible enhance the valued characteristics will not be permitted other than in exceptional circumstances. Paragraph 8 about intensification says proposals will only be approved if a need is identified which cannot be satisfied elsewhere in the village and is of overall public benefit. Now, this isn't a case where a family's outgrown the property and needs more space. These applicants have only recently bought it. It's already big enough for a family home. These are not exceptional circumstances. There's no overall public benefit to enlarging this property. In fact, although it is not an affordable house as such, extending it is only going to place it even more out of reach of local buyers in terms of increased market value in the future. I can see that... I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I then have Diane Jeremy.
Good morning, Diane Jeremy, the Chair of Middleton and Smerrill Parish Council. This planning application has been discussed in 3 parish council meetings and objections were submitted to the original and subsequent amended plans. Members of the public attended all these meetings to present their opinions and to update council on the views of local residents. There were no representations from anyone in support of the application at these meetings. Council has taken into account the residents' views in its response to the plans. Council objects to the planned alteration and extensions to 2 Castle Cottage, which would change Area A of the conservation area in an obtrusive way that is contrary to the scale of cottages throughout the village of Middleton. This unique pair of semi-detached cottages, designed by the estate for proportionately larger space than ordinary workers' cottages, is highly regarded by the community for its historical associations. Castle Cottage makes an important contribution to the local character of the village. Our village statement, published by the PDNPA, notes our community aspirations to remain a rural-focused community, maintaining its local population, providing a suitable village hall, encouraging family homes, and looking to preserve its historic legacy. This application fails to address this aspiration as the current layout of the cottage meets family usage and the plans would result in a significantly larger house, disproportionate in relation to number 1 Castle Cottage. Council agrees with the strong feeling that to alter one side of this historic pair will damage the cottage scale irrevocably. No other cottage properties within the conservation area have extensions on this scale, and a bad precedent would be set if this were permitted. And the location of the cottages situated on the curve of the road means that the extension can be regarded as frontage, so highly prominent, obtrusive and contrary to the conservation area policy. The high visibility of Castle Cottage means that these proposals would result in significant harm to the established character and historic status of architecture within the conservation area of the village. And it's the wish of council and the large number of parishioners who've registered their objections in writing and in person that Castle Cottages need to be preserved externally in their current layout, in their unique setting, as they are part of the cultural heritage of Middleton and Smerrill Parish. It's the firm view of the Parish Council that these proposals for development do not demonstrate how the character, appearance and significance of the conservation area would be preserved or enhanced, and they should not be approved. To do so would permanently undermine the integrity of Conservation Area A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've now got Mr. Seeley. Can I just, for the other speakers, can I just say we have got certain messages from what's been said so far, and if we can avoid repetition of the same points, I would be very grateful. But I've got Mr. Mark Seeley next.
Chair, Committee, thank you for allowing me to speak at this meeting. My wife Donna and I purchased number 1 Castle Cottage in January 24 as our forever home. We never envisaged having a development of this magnitude to the adjoining property thrust upon us. From the outset, the applicant has not engaged us in any of the proposed plans or ideas. Your own planning document states on paragraph 24 that applicants should work closely with those affected by the proposals to evolve design that take account into the views of the community. Applicants that can demonstrate early proactive and effective management of the community should be looked on more favourably than those that cannot. Furthermore, the very prescriptive guidelines stated in the 2018 Party Wall Act state that the applicants should give 2 months to 1 year's notice to the neighbouring property. Prior to building work starting, this should be in writing. The applicant has demonstrated neither of these points. In fact, the first we knew of the proposals was when we received the letter from the Peak District National Park Planning Department. One of my concerns centres around the joint water tank that is at the rear of the cottages. It shares a common cast base on top of the coal houses, with a further cast lid on the top of the stone walls. This provides both cottages with the water prior to being connected to the main supply. If the proposed extension to the link building breaks into this tank, it will severely compromise the structural integrity of our part of the tank, to which we are vehemently opposed. Furthermore, the applicant has received building regulations to extend into the attic space with more bedrooms by lowering the ceiling height in the second floor rooms. I have again concerns over the effects on our own ceilings and floors, as the cottages share longitudinal timbers throughout. DMH 7.38 states that an extension should only be permitted if it does not detract from the character or appearance of the original building. The report states that the property benefits from a porch to the north elevation. This is a stone porch which has been there for nearly 50 years and so is part of the character of the building, but it's going to be demolished, as well as the landing window. If this development is allowed to proceed, it will destroy a unique and outstanding example of Edwardian estate workers' cottages forever. Thank you.
Thank you. I now have Donna Seeley.
Good morning. Despite many objections being raised that are detailed and linked to planning and policy demonstrating non-compliance, my view is that this report is biased as it interprets policy to fit the planning proposals for approval rather than the proposals having to be aligned with planning and policy. The report does not reflect the strength of feeling of opposition to these proposals on the grounds of undesirable changes to the landscape or any other value characteristics. Castle Cottages are 110 years old, designed by Sarah Waterhouse of Middleton Hall and built in 1914. Both cottages were occupied by employees of the Waterhouses up until number 2 being purchased in 2023 and number 1 in 2024. They are totally unique and there are no other cottages of this design. They're in very good condition. The proposals fail to conserve the value features as they will be demolished and certainly do not enhance the property. The heritage of the cottages has been completely disregarded. The decision to recommend approval, seemingly on design alone, was made before the public consultation had even finished, appearing to be because the 3 sets of plans had been submitted as it was originally scheduled for the July meeting, and conservation being disregarded. There are 3 separate objections alleging the presence of bats, not just one, as stated in the report. 7 people have seen those bats, including a parish councillor, coming from the front of the cottage in the gable end of number 2. The planned works reach just below the gable end framework on number 2, and this extension cannot be erected without causing disturbance to that framework. DMC 11 refers to the cumulative impact of other developments of the site. The lowering of the ceilings to accommodate the planned attic conversion cannot be done without having a huge impact on the habitat if bats are present. The key aims, which are quite clear, are not at present being met. The proposed extensions are not modest in scale as designed, as they almost double the footprint of the cottage. The cumulative plan is for it to become a 4 to 5 bedroom property over 3 floors with a tiny shower room in the foyer. It is not respectful of the house building, destroying the character and integrity of the cottages. And as previously stated, there are no other cottages with extensions of this size and in such a prominent position, so it is not in keeping and will harm the character of the village as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Seeley. And now I've got either Mr. Lack or Mrs. Lack. It's Mrs. Lack, right. You've obviously been watching and you know the form, so when you're ready, the light's on. Thank you.
We're more than happy to comply with all the recommendations the planners have made and thank them for working with us and our architect to create a harmonious design compliant with PDMP policy. Chris Briggs' assessment covers all the issues, so therefore we'd like to take this opportunity to explain what this development means to us. We also hope to allay some of the fears we've seen in the representations. The side extensions create a dining kitchen with sufficient room to cook, provide ample space for kitchen amenities, a dining area to seat our immediate family when they visit, and a small space suitable for hybrid working for Jim, who's worked mainly from home since lockdown when it became the norm for many. The second part of the development to link the garage to the lobby area would create a lobby to provide utility space, cloakroom and downstairs bathroom. The main reason we left our last cottage and small holding in Rowland was due to Jim's back injury, meaning he was no longer able to maintain our small holding home to our 3 alpacas. He is due imminent spinal surgery and therefore both upstairs and downstairs bathrooms will be necessary for the future. Presently, the pipework from the boiler in the garage to the house runs externally and thus energy is wasted. The lobby will be internalise the pipework, conserving energy and helping the UK in its efforts to reduce carbon emissions. We think it's also very important to put these plans in context. There have been misleading representations, both verbal and pictorial. The pictorial one with the red outline appears to show the extension engulfing the greenhouse. The side extension will not reach the extent of the current patio, which is behind the trellis, which is behind the greenhouse. Therefore, it will also have no negative impact on the garden or wildlife habitats. Wildlife is paramount to our life in the Peak Park. We've created cottage gardens, orchards, vegetable plots and wildflower meadows, providing habitats and food for fieldfares, woodpeckers, owls, doves, nesting redstarts, pheasants, hares, rabbits, hedgehogs and bats, and abundance of insects and butterflies. The property is unlisted and a very recent application for it to be listed rejected. Our opinion is the beauty and charm of the cottage and its cottagey feel is down to the fenestration, ornate mullions, limestone walls and stone slates. We would be adding more of these lovely cottagey features with this planned extension. These extensions will not be creating any separate living accommodation. It won't become a rental or a holiday let. We aren't property developers. We intend this to be our final home and it will remain a 3, not 5 bedroom cottage, all 3 in the house building. We believe we are creating sustainable hybrid working and living accommodation in harmony with the house building and extremely diverse mix of housing in Middleton, which includes Dales housing, new bungalows, old buildings, new ones, huge and small. It's been mentioned that the new plans will put the property out of reach for local residents. We are local residents. We've lived in the Peak District for 13 years and we do not consider ourselves to be incomers. Middleton by Yulgrave is indeed a sleepy, tranquil village. Similar to Rowland, our previous home, the tranquility is why we chose to live here. It completely reflects our lifestyle and we're looking forward to joining the wonderful community we've heard so much about. This small extension will make a huge difference. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Well, I think 5 or 6 of us did do a site visit yesterday, so we were very familiar with what we were looking at. Any members wish to contribute? Ken, otherwise I'll start.
It's just a bit of detail from Chris, if I may, Chair. That lean-to, how far does it extend from the building, and how high is it compared with what is being proposed? I mean, you said quite reasonably that the extension is 4 metres. The lean-to is what, 2 metres? I don't know.
I don't think it's even 2 metres. It's quite insubstantial. It goes. Its height probably goes to that line there on that plan.
Sure.
So it's quite insubstantial, really.
Yeah. And do we know when it was attached, when it was built?
It had planning permission granted in 1977.
Thank you. It's just that I recognise the obvious depth of feeling that the residents have against this proposal, Chair, but there were occasions when I found it quite difficult to relate what we saw yesterday and what we've been presented with what was being described. I felt when we made our site visit yesterday that what was being proposed was appropriate in the context of the building, in the context of its location, and in the context of the village and the conservation area. The parapet wall, which will mask the glazing, from the roadside perspective, made no difference to the view, in the sense that there, in the background, there is already a stone wall. It was moving it forward. Whilst I recognise, as I say, the depth of feeling, I can't share that, Chair. I think this is a reasonable development, as has been described by our officers.
Well, can I just say that I agree with you? I'm not sure that I understand why such a depth of feeling has arisen over this. This seems to be a modest extension, which we do permit under our policies, which actually more than usually complies with most of the advice in our various design guides. And I'm not sure really what the issue is. Any other members got a view on it? Ginny?
It's a question, really, because at least one objector has spoken about the roof area. Well, that's not under discussion, is it, in this application?
No, the roof of the dwelling won't be affected by this extension.
I think what we certainly could say is that some of the points being raised are about private property rights, which are not what we are concerned with. And the there was another point. Oh, and Councillor Melstrom's point about the size of the property in relation to the market is one which I think many members around the table would have sympathy with. But there is no policy base upon which we could justify a refusal on that ground. But we would welcome your comment on it when we start to review the local plan, which is the time in which that sort of thing would have to be considered. The consultation for which goes out very shortly. But I don't think we can take on board that as part of this concept, as part of this context. I'm going to move this for approval from the chair on the ground set out in the report. Is that seconded by anybody? Ginny, you're seconding it. Do members have any other views on that? In that case, all those in favour of permitting it? Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. That is permitted. Right. Main Street, Taddington. First of all, do members want to break anyway? Would you like to be back here? Can we manage it within 5 minutes? 5? And then you'll take the chair for this next one, because I imagine the applicants. but they, through their business interests, have a vague interest in this. And we've got Rory here to introduce it briefly, because we've got a very long report.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, in the interest of brevity, I'm going to be providing a bit of a synopsis of the issues on site. Obviously, there's much more detailed analysis in the committee report. Essentially, this is a Section 73 variation of condition application. The application seeks to do two things, and they are for the complete restoration of Deepdale, which is the valley which sits immediately next to Topley Pike Quarry, and for the increase in the annual export limits, the tonnage of product that's allowed to leave the site per year. So in 2018, the committee approved a consolidation consent, which tied all of the historic consents of the quarry together. And importantly, it included, if you can see the little red dot here, the restoration of this part of the valley of Deepdale. So historically, in the 1970s and 80s, quarry waste, which included silts from the dust suppression system and granular bunding quarry waste, had been deposited and tipped into the quarry. During the dismantling process that began in 2019, it became clear that there was an additional volume, an additional body of material that was discovered slightly higher up on the Northern Valley face here, which is what's referred to in the report as the over-tipped material. The reason it's called the over-tipped material is so that it can be distinguished as a different body from the main body of the tip that was granted consent in 2018. Essentially, the applicant has submitted quite a rigorous volume of testing. Trial pits were dug into this over-tipped material. The material that was extracted was sent to laboratories for testing, and it was concluded in agreement with the Environment Agency that the material in this over-tip was the same as the original tip that was consented in 2018. So essentially, the main body of this material is these silts and granular buns, inert materials. So what the proposals are for, the removal of the rest of this material that currently doesn't have consent, for it to be placed up in the main body of the quarry here to be used in the restoration process. So I think the next plan shows there's a pocket of it down here. One of the key differences now is that the majority of the material, all of the tip material, will need to be placed lower down in the landforming. It became clear in 2019 during the dismantling of the tip that this silt material liquefies through the vibrations of the truck as it's being transported into the quarry, which makes it unsuitable for use in the higher landforming until it's had time to settle. So the proposals are now for a containment cell to be built in this southwest corner. The silts will be placed on the hard rock floor and will be bunded by quite a significant granular bund, a very thick wall of hard rock material that will allow the silts to dry, and then will be capped off by another granular bund on top. So it will be entirely encased by this containment cell. The reason that's important is because once the restoration has been completed, the quarry will be flooded, which will happen naturally at the moment the quarry is actively dewatered. So once the extraction is finished, the pumps will be turned off and the water will rise up to this level. So this material will sit below the water level. The reason that's important to consider is because there's this direct connection, this natural outflow from the lake which feeds into the River Wye, which is why a great deal of emphasis, the River Wye, being a triple SI, a site of specific scientific interest, special scientific interest. So it's a very important hydrological environment to protect. And so a great deal of emphasis has been placed on understanding what this overtip material is to make sure that no toxins or pollutants are transferred into the river system. There'll be a mitigation, if the committee are minded to approve it, there'll be a mitigation strategy in place, so there'll be a watching brief, a qualified professional will be on site, watching this material being extracted to identify any previously uncharacterized materials or toxic materials that arise, so that material can be taken away from site and processed appropriately. Really just belt and braces ensuring that no unacceptable toxins or pollutants end up in that water course, which has been the critical piece of this application. Essentially, allowing the removal of the overtip material will allow the complete restoration of Deepdale, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty. You know, it's an SAC area, has very important landscape merits. So the full restoration, the removal of all of this quarry waste material and the allowance of it to return to that natural valley state is considered to be a very significant benefit in the national park. There's a public footpath, this blue dotted line here, that will run through the middle of the dale once it's restored. It will be reopened, so that natural valley side will be available to the public to enjoy quite close views and vistas. They'll be able to get into the valley itself and enjoy that work once the restoration process is completed. So it's officers' opinion that there's a very significant gain to be had for the national park here. The other aspect of the proposals are for the increase in the annual export limit to be moved from 250,000 tonnes per annum up to 400,000 tonnes per annum. The Highways Authority, Derbyshire County Council's Highways Authority, have agreed that the vehicular access to the site is safe and capable of withstanding this increase in HGV, heavy goods vehicles, the articulated lorries that will be coming in and out. It's important for the committee to note that the increase in the export limit won't have any impact on the overall volume of stone to be worked, so it'll be the same volume of stone. It will just allow them to export it and get it out of the gate quicker. This application has been in with the authority for some time. Probably this aspect of the proposals would have had more of an impact for the applicant if we'd reached a determination stage quicker. As it stands, the extraction process is going to end on the 31st of December next year. The authority is confident that that extraction process can take place within the currently permitted time frame and limits. So essentially the officer's assessment is that the site is in such a remote location with a good access to the major road network, and so the additional daily HGV movements to and from the site would not cause undue harm to the amenity of local residents or for the safe operation of the highway. In summary, both aspects of the proposals are considered to be acceptable in principle and in accordance with the policies of the development plan and the National Planning Policy Framework. The complete restoration of Deepdale will be a great benefit to the national park and will offer a significant enhancement to the valued characteristics of the protected landscape for the public to enjoy. The officer's recommendation is the application is approved, subject to a final agreement of the wording of the conditions attached to the consent and to a signing of the addendum to the existing section 106. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rory. As somebody who does know this little patch of the world quite well, it's a tremendous improvement, and I'm happy to move it from the chair, actually. Have any members got any questions or issues they wish to raise? Kath and Mike.
Does it mean that the completion of this quarry working will be the 31st of December 2025?
Yeah, that's correct, Kath. Yeah, this application has no bearing really on the extraction operation. It's on course and will finish by the end of next year.
I'm just thinking that the 1942 consents, 100 years, getting pretty close, so I thought I'd just question it.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to welcome the report. Once I'd worked out to get past all the italic stuff to the back
to the
end
bit
of
you
the
wanted to
report.
read, yes.
Yeah, the stuff that really made sense to the layperson. That was really welcome. And in contrast to the attitude of our water companies, it's really pleasing to see the attention being paid to reducing and getting out any toxic chemicals that may be around. I did just have one question about with the contours and it being quite steep and references to cliff edge faces, whether there are barriers up to stop the public getting near that, or once this work is completed.
Yeah, so there'll be no public access into the quarry void itself. So the way that the quarry has been worked is a very old quarry and was worked historically not under a modern schedule of health and safety and what have you. So there are very large faces that surround the site that you wouldn't get in a modern quarry today. Much larger faces than we work with today. So there'll be no public access into the quarry itself. That shan't be an issue.
But Deepdale's called Deepdale for a reason. It's got very high sides to it. Ginny?
It's just a question. Thank you for a really good, extensive report. It's just a question about the on-site expert who's going to be monitoring what goes into the quarry. Will this be somebody employed by the quarries, or is it going to be somebody from us?
No, it shan't be somebody from the authority. It will be an independent person, so not an Aggregate Industries employee. It'll be a geotechnical specialist who will come on site, be there for that watching brief, to make sure that as the excavation moves through, anything that hasn't previously been identified is picked up. But no, it shan't be from the authority and it shan't be from Aggregate Industries. It will be an independent third party, appropriately qualified.
Ken?
Yeah, once it's done extracting and the reclamation starts watering up, will there be public access then? And if so, will there be life preservers?
There's no intention for the quarry void once the lake is instated for public access. It might be I'm certainly happy to explore the prospect of life preservers. In the event that trespassers get in. I know that wild swimming and trespassing to make that happen is quite a big issue for quarry operators these days. So I'm sure it's something
But it's the obligation of every landowner, isn't it, that's got water on their land. It's the same everywhere. Okay, members, that has been proposed and seconded. Unless anybody wishes to add anything to it, all those in favour of adopting the report? Anyone against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Rory. Now, we do have the applicant for the next one here. Otherwise, I would have taken Tom next. But as the applicant's here, I am abandoning the seat. Ginny is going to take mine. And someone's going to let me know when to come back.
Tracking back to the right item.
Yeah, we have got a speaker. Okay. Thank you. We move on to item 10. I've taken over the chair because Patrick, the chairman, is a close neighbour of the applicant. So, Mark, you're presenting this, are you?
Yes, thanks, Ginny.
Thank you.
Good morning, members. The application here is for a solar array to the main roof and the roof of boiler house of the property of Aid House. Aid House is a traditionally constructed limestone dwelling set within a large garden with a further croft to the north and within the same ownership. And the site's located within the Taddington Conservation Area to the north of the main road through Taddington, as you can see on the plan here. So this is the main road running along through the village there. And that's a closer view of the site. So here is the dwelling itself. And some photographs to show you. As I say, it's a traditionally constructed property. The main dwelling here with the lower eastern section here, which, as you can see from the photographs, already has a solar array to the roof. And this shows on the approach from the right of way from the south. So you can see, at least in this particular photograph, the panels to the low roof are partially obscured by the existing planting, and here's the main roof of the dwelling. And that's another photograph showing the solar panels to the lower range. And this shows the west-facing roof as far as you can make that out. Of course, the front of the dwellings to this side here. And just to go through the plans, that's the existing cottage. Again, you can see the edge of the panels here. And as proposed, so to this roof you'd have an array of 10 panels set out centrally within the roof space. And you can just about make out the panels here, existing and proposed, so a further 6 there, so 16 in total. So moving on to the merits of the proposal. As set out in the report, policy DS1 supports the provision of renewable energy infrastructure in principle. Policy CC2 sets out that renewable energy proposals will be encouraged, providing that they can avoid adverse impacts. As noted, the full array here would amount to 16 panels. These would be in addition to the 17 approved panels split between the eastern and south-facing roof of the main dwelling and the west-facing roof of the double garage. Solar panels would represent a modern intervention on the principal elevation and roof of an 18th century cottage that's named in the Taddington Conservation Area appraisal and would be visible from footpaths surrounding the property. Further, it's important that the array is not considered in isolation, but is looked at in the context of the impacts arising from development on the site as a whole, which would be furthered by the installation of this array. Previously approved solar panels, which were approved by officers under delegated powers, are now installed on the eastern lower roof of Aid House, and it's considered that the cumulative impact of a further array on the main roof of the property would represent a harmful intervention to the historic character of the property and the conservation area, contrary to relevant policies and guidance. Furthermore, there'd be a conflict with the adopted SPD for renewable energy, which seeks to avoid roof-mounted arrays on principal elevations, particularly in the case of historic buildings. So overall, while the development would have renewable benefits, and that public benefit is considered to be already partly provided for by the existing solar panels that have been provided, and the harm that would arise outweighs the public benefits here, conflicting with policies DS1, GSP3, CC2, L3, DMC3 and DMC8, and the application is therefore recommended for refusal, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I think we have one speaker, Joshua. Are these the photographs that? No, I'm sorry. We have had the photographs from you. So it's the button, and can you ensure the red light comes on, please? Yes. Thank you. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Josh. I'm the eldest son of Sam and Dan Priest, who send their apologies for not being able to make this meeting themselves, but they're abroad at the moment. We'd first like to say that we embrace the planning process, and we're really glad to have this opportunity to present our views to the committee. As you've seen, our application is to put solar panels on the roof of our unlisted property. With the additional panels, our goal is to move to electric vehicles and air source heating, thereby reducing our household emissions and doing our bit to achieve net zero. We're grateful for the strong support of our parish council and of many in our local community. We'd like to address some of the points made in this report which we feel do not adequately reflect the pros and cons of our proposed development. We do agree that the development would make a material change to the property. However, the harmful public impact of this is substantially mitigated by the fact that it would not be visible from many spots in the village and not at all from most footpaths surrounding the house. As you will see in the photographs we've provided, the panels would not be visible at all from the nearby easterly or northerly footpaths, land or housing. To the west, there is a short stretch of Church Farm Lane from which the west-facing panels on the boiler house would currently be visible. However, existing evergreen hedging will be allowed to grow a further metre to screen this completely. There is a 5-metre stretch of the unadopted lane joining Main Road and Hades Lane from which the development would be visible. It's up on the screen at the moment. However, the main value of the character and appearance of Aid House lies in its frontage, as shown in photograph 1, which we regularly watch passers-by stop and photograph from our kitchen window. From here, directly in front of the property, there is no view at all of the proposed development. The width of the footpath just doesn't allow you to stand far enough back to see them. We believe that the public impact of the panels is therefore mitigated by the lack of views from around and indeed directly in front. We'd also like to turn to the public benefits of this proposed development, which we believe are understated in the planning report. The report argues that Aid House is already served by panels approved earlier this year by officials, which we are grateful for. While it's true that Aid House's existing array has allowed our household to take some steps towards decarbonisation, the power generated does not cover all of our energy requirements, and we remain reliant on fossil fuels for transportation and heating. The purpose of our development is to move to electric vehicles and air source heating, meeting these energy demands entirely through renewable solar energy. We believe that the additional public benefit is therefore greater from another set of solar panels on the property, not lesser, because it allows us to seriously reduce our emissions and do our bit to achieve net zero. Should note that only by each of us doing our bit will we reach this net zero goal as a country and a species. So with regard to our proposed development, we think this planning report overstates the public impacts and understates the public benefits. We think these points mean the decision is more finely balanced for the committee than it appears in the report. Our ask of the committee today then is this. In your decision, we'd like you to rule in favour of progress and support one of the many small changes required to meet one of our biggest challenges. Thank you. Time that perfectly.
Thank you. We did do a site visit, which some of us were on yesterday, so we had the benefit of actually seeing this in place. My own opinion is that the panels on the main house were very prominent, would be very prominent, but round the side they would not be at all prominent on the what I think is called the westerly side. But I'm going to open it up for members to give their opinions. Ken?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with your analysis. I think in the context of the building and it being in the conservation area, we have our policies, we have our design guidance. I think we have to look to maintain the direction of travel that those point us in. I think I have some problem initially with the drawings that have been submitted against the reality, because as you can see from this slide, the panels that exist on the extension to the main dwelling cover the entire roof. Yet in the illustration, the elevation drawing, they don't. And that makes me wonder, given that there are 10 on that roof, which appears to be roughly the same size as the roof of the dwelling, if there are 10 proposed for the dwelling roof, are they the same size? And in fact, will they cover the entire roof rather than part of it, as is shown in the elevation drawing, is one question. But nevertheless, even though I'm not suggesting that there's an attempt to mislead, I just think it's a depiction issue that we just need to be aware of. The principle, I think, is quite correct, that there shouldn't be panels on that main roof. I think that there is certainly, as you've suggested, Chair, scope for putting panels on the boiler house roof, on the lean-to, to the west, I think it is. Again, the depiction on the plan shows that they only occupy part of the roof, so is there scope for more panels to go on that roof? When we were on site, there was, I think, a dormer at the back that we looked at and thought, well, perhaps a panel could go on that as well. So are we in a position of perhaps not accepting this proposal, but looking at a further iteration that looks to accommodate more panels on the boiler house roof, a smaller, so a ground-mounted array in the garden of the property, in order to meet the quite appropriate aspirations, I think, of the applicant It's just that I'm not convinced that this is the appropriate way to achieve those aspirations.
Thank you, Ken. Anybody? Matt?
Yeah, I'd like to commend the applicants for the application. I think when you look at the photographs, you see that there are things that we accept as part of living in modern society. So when you're stood at that corner, you can see their bins, you can see aerials associated with television and Sky. Those have all become acceptable. I was involved with the climate change policy development when I was an employee of the National Park Authority, and I don't think that the National Park Authority as a whole gets how significant climate change is going to be. And I completely agree with the point that the applicant made. We've got to make sure that this sort of thing becomes completely accepted in society. And so I would like to propose that we accept this application.
Okay, so we've had a proposal for acceptance. Does anybody else want to speak? No?
Chair.
Mike?
I mean, I suppose it would really be a question to the applicant, but I just wondered why an alternative hadn't been proposed, because the garden here is quite extensive, and it would it would lend itself to having enough panels on it to offset what would go on the roof. The other issue I have is with the finish on those. The panels that are up there now look to be quite shiny. They seem to be reflective of the light, and you can get panels that are more of a sort of matte finish, so that they do not catch the sunlight to reflect it. Obviously, they want the sunlight to get the heat generation.
Yeah, Brian?
Thanks. And don't get me wrong, we absolutely do understand where all the direction is going in climate change. What we have is legislation and policy that also puts a lot of weight and value on heritage. And what we're trying to do here, case by case, so that cumulatively across the national park, we can achieve a happy balance between both of those things. There is a move towards a change of materials, but we also value historic materials as well. And I think what we're suggesting here is that there's ways, which we've already seen, actually, by permitting the outbuilding, and we're saying there's more scope for things like that. But I think we need to strive for that balance over time, or else we end up prioritising one thing rather than the multiple objectives that we have in a national park. Thank you.
Kath?
I remember some years ago, Tissington Hall's building, as you go into Tissington, they wanted to alter it to a restaurant, which they did, and he wanted to put PV tiles on, and the National Park were not in agreement with it. But anyway, there was a scheme devised that he was able to put them on, and I think we should be working together similarly to make sure these tiles go on, but tiles which are acceptable.
Ken?
Can I just say, Chair, I mean, repeat to an extent what Brian has said, but we aren't saying this isn't refusing this outright. What we're saying is, yeah, it's completely appropriate, but this isn't quite the way to do it, and that we need to go back and discuss with the applicant how we can achieve his aspirations as within the context of our policies is all. It's not a case of saying no, it's a case of saying, yeah, we like the idea, but this just isn't the right way of doing it, is all.
Mike?
I appreciate that Matt's put on the table a proposal and seconding, but I do wonder whether it would be possible to defer this for the applicant to meet with officers to find a way forward that would be more acceptable to the authority, because I can't vote for this proposal as it stands. Fully go with the sentiments you've expressed, Matthew, but I do think there is an alternative here that could be mutually acceptable.
So you're proposing a deferral?
Yes,
Is anybody going to second that? Do we have to? Right. Okay. So we have. Yes, I will.
So on the, thanks everyone for your points. On the appropriateness point, so there we've considered on the ground, and this is highly visible from the top of the village where you see this green expanse and there would be big black patches of panels, whereas having them on the roof, they're not visible from this sort of main vistas at the top of the village, which looks over the whole Dannington Conservation Area. And can I remind that the aspiration is to fully decarbonise, and panels on the boiler house would not be sufficient to do this.
Thank you. We get that.
And sorry as well, they'll be compliant. The panels are compliant with the Peak Parks policies. The panels that you've designated being acceptable, we will use those.
Okay, so we've had a proposal to accept. Yes. Could we hear what the conditions would be, please?
Yep. So we'd have a 3-year time limit for implementation to secure the submitted plans, to secure the appearance, design and finish of the panels, and for them to be removed when they're no longer required for energy generation purposes.
Okay. So we've had this approved and seconded. I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour? 3, 4. All those against? So, as chair, I've got the... I'm going to put a proposal in that we defer this, as recommended by Mike, for officers to discuss with the applicant how we can best accommodate this within the Peak Park, not saying no to solar panels, but accommodate it so that it fits better with the area that it is in. So can I have a seconder, please? And can I take a vote? All those willing to defer this? So that's deferred for you to work with the officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I say in the circumstances, that's very generous, so thank you to the committee.
Let's try not to take Patrick's paperwork with me.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to go back to Onkert, the one that was before.
We've got 2 people in the audience there. Are they for something?
Must be
Oh, I think that will be the Cornford one, probably. Right. Okay, let's get back to Onkert. We're going on to the item 8. Have you got a page number, which would be jolly helpful? Right. The next item then is going to be Loxley Park Farm, Onkert, a dependent relative unit. You're dealing with this, are you?
Yes, thanks,
Mark?
Chair. Thank you. This application is for the conversion of a redundant building to a dependent relative unit at Loxley Park Farm at Onkert. As you can see on the site there, the farm stands to the south side of Dowse Lane, to the northwest of Onkert. You can see the village down at the corner of the plan there. The site comprises a holding of approximately 25 acres with the farmhouse, which you'll see better on the next plan in relation to the development site, and a range of modern portal-framed agricultural buildings to the northwest as well. So if I zoom in a bit more, then here we go. You can see the farmhouse itself is here. This is the single access to the site off the road to the north, and these are the more modern barns, and outlined in red here is the application building, which is joined to the front of this modern barn here. The red line is simply showing access to the site with a parking space to the front. So this is the building in question. It's a modest former agricultural building, and you can see it's had a later, more modern extension to one side that's currently under a sheet roof, and the proposals would be to reslate that to match the roof on the existing building. I'll go through the details on the plans, of course, but externally the alterations are otherwise fairly limited. And that's the front of the building as a whole. Clearly the right-hand side having more heritage significance and interest than the left-hand side. And this is showing the rear here. So this is the building joining on to the larger agricultural building behind it. And the gable. Just a photo of the inside showing how its former historic features, as they might have been removed, and its sort of concrete and lime washed walls. An existing ground floor plan showing a milking parlour to one side and an enclosed store essentially in the older part of the building. And as proposed, so it would be an open plan living area at ground floor. This is a new access at one side to improve access into the building. And that's the existing first floor. And as proposed, a first floor would be introduced. As you saw in the previous plan, there wasn't one. And it's a single bed annex. So it's modest in scale, which accords with our policies for ancillary accommodation and our adopted guidance as well. The existing front elevation, and as proposed, so if I just flick back again between the two, you'll see there's very little change there. The treatment of the opening here has been amended during the course of the application, and it's appropriate. And the proposed rear, we don't have an existing rear plan, but the additions here are the two roof lights and the flue coming through there, which has been tucked around to the rear to limit its impact on the building's appearance at the front. And the gable, and this is the new door that I drew to your attention on the floor plan. So there'd be no separate address for this property, no separate access. It wouldn't have its own garden area. It wouldn't have its own parking area. That parking space shown was within the existing yard. No post box, no separate utility meters. So from both a policy and essentially from a case law point of view as well, it meets the definitions of ancillary accommodation. It would be occupied by a family member of the applicant. The impacts on the building itself, as you've seen, are limited. And due to the position of the property, it wouldn't raise amenity concerns for any other neighbouring property either. So subject to the conditions set out in the report, it's recommended for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just be clear about the conditions? Should there be one on outside lighting?
We've got a burden back mitigation enhancement plan, so alongside that would require external lighting to be limited and controlled. We can separate it out if you'd like to.
Yeah, that should be clear. And the removal of permitted development rights is simply in relation to this unit?
That's right.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Seems straightforward to me, members. I don't know about anybody else, but Ken?
Yeah, I was just reading through conditions as well. Restrict occupancy of the annex ancillary to the existing dwelling house. Can we have a condition in there that it's not going to be an Airbnb out like that?
I think you need a policy base for that. We don't think we've got a policy base for it at the moment, have we? No. I mean, it's the sort of thing we're going to have to look at when we revise the local plan, isn't it?
Well, sometimes we put conditions on that it's got to be like a farm employee.
That actually is in our present policies. I think that's the difference. Yeah, but I'd love to be able to do what you've just suggested, but I think it would go beyond what would be
because the building
justified.
So I was just going to say, Chair, because the building here has heritage significance, it would qualify to be converted to a holiday let under our policies anyway, so there wouldn't be grounds to do that.
Ken.
Thank you, Chair. Just one comment, really. I've no problems with the proposal itself. It's just the climate change mitigation measures. I mean, there's 14 bullet points there, and 11 of them are to do with bath taps and water management, which is commendable, but it doesn't really seem to me to be entering into the spirit of looking to meet our CC1 policy. Even one of the other three is about the rating of the white goods that might be used. I mean, our things like insulation, for example, seems to me to be another way of looking to accommodate reduced energy usage and things like that. It would have been nice perhaps to look at air source heat pump, but there is a wood burner, but you know, the wood burning itself is perhaps an issue. But it just seemed a bit light on CC1. That's all. And I mean, the corollary, I suppose, is there any way of upgrading that?
It's a very small building. I think that's part of the reason.
Sure.
I think that's right, and obviously the lack of space around to provide, because it doesn't have its own curtilage, to provide additional infrastructure might be constrained. However, it is part of a larger site, so that there may be scope to provide more there in terms of renewable energy, for example. We could have a condition, further condition relating to climate change mitigation measures, a statement to be provided with further details. I take the point that you're making. There's a lot of detail provided, but the measures are relatively limited, and it is a challenge on these smaller buildings, particularly. But it's something that we can look to strengthen.
Yeah, I just thought including insulation, for example, an appropriate level of insulation would have gone.
We quite often get those proposed. The difficulty is control and enforcement of that,
okay.
Because obviously under building regulations that is assessed. But as a planning authority, it's difficult for us to know what has gone in retrospectively, as it were.
And it's, I mean, insulation is one thing, but when you look at some of these things on this particular list and you imagine trying to enforce them...
completely agree. That's a completely separate issue.
That's a degree of intrusion into people's private life that is not possible.
But I'd just exhort, if I may, Chair, Mark and colleagues to do what they can to achieve as best they can within the scope of the small building.
Right. So, on nobody's... well, I'll move it from the chair. Second it. Has any members got any further comments on it? No? In that case, all those in favour? Anyone against? No? That's all carried. Thank you very much. And there's two members of the public present. Which is your application? Neil Farm, Cornford. Can we deal with that one next? Yes, okay. We'll deal with that one next, if you'd like. So that is agenda item 12. Yeah, page 97. Right, you're introducing it, Adam.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just found it on the presentation. Yes, this is Neil Barn Bungalow in Cornford. The site is in open countryside, as you can see, fairly near Flash, but in a fairly isolated location. At the end of a private access track, you can see there. And the property is up here, comprises a dwelling house and the building which is subject to this application, which is a former agricultural building which has been converted some time ago and is now in use as a holiday let. So the application is to use that building and extend it as a market dwelling, an unrestricted market dwelling. You see the extension there on the front, which would be a projecting gable off the elevation of the building that faces the dwelling house. That's the character of the existing building. You can see it's a fairly humble building of agricultural origins, which has been converted fairly sympathetically to its current use as a holiday let. And that's, you can see that just the edge of the barn on the left on that photo, and this is where the extension would project forward and face towards this conservatory, which is one of the points of concern. So that's the existing elevation on the front, and that's the proposed extension. And we've got concerns about the impact of that extension upon the character of the building. It'll change its form, and it'll introduce a more domestic arrangement, which in officers' view will harm the character of the building. We wouldn't normally approve an extension like that to a barn, and a barn of that sort of small scale, you could potentially see a cat slide lean-to or a lean-to off the side, but you wouldn't see a gable like that, especially off the front. There's the existing side elevation proposed. You can see the projecting gable off the front. Rear elevation's no change there, and the other side, and you can see the extension proposed there. So that's the existing layout, the one-bedroom holiday let, and that's the proposed. So one issue in this is the impact of the extension, and officers are also concerned that there will be views from this window, which is proposed to be bedroom 2, which would look towards this at a fairly close distance, and the impact that would have upon the amenity of the occupants of the dwelling and this dwelling, as this is proposed to be a separate market dwelling in its own right, so there wouldn't necessarily be any connection between the occupants of those properties. And secondly, and I suppose more fundamentally, is an issue in principle on whether the use of this building as a market dwelling is in accordance with our housing policies. We are in the countryside here, where our policies are generally restrictive for market dwellings, and we have a building, and yes, it is a traditional building, it is a former agricultural building, but it has been converted and its use has been secured by its current use as a holiday let. So there isn't any requirement for the proposed market dwelling, and that would be contrary to policy HC1C. Officers have discussed this with the applicant, the agent, I believe Gareth has spoken to the agent. Our view is that there would be scope here for an affordable dwelling to meet local need. Our policies would support that in principle if the case could be made, and there could be scope for a smaller extension as a lean-to, as I've just discussed. But the applicant would like the current application, which is for a market dwelling, to be determined as submitted. So the application is recommended for refusal for the reasons set out in the report. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Now we've one speaker on this, which is Mr. Dukesell. Will you make sure the light is on your machine? Thank you very much. And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Councillors. 20 years ago, the planning policy to resist open market dwellings was intended to preserve the local communities, retain properties for local needs, and retain families in the parishes that they were brought up. Village schools, pubs, village halls have since closed down, and residents no longer know their neighbour because they're transient. They may only stay for a long weekend, maybe a week or two at best, and then they return to their normal home. Properties that are not subject to restriction on sale are still being sold for holiday lets as a supplementary source of income. The planning policy to allow such properties to be used for holiday lets rather than dwellings has watered down the community, and there isn't the opportunity for the younger generation to find a property close to their parents anymore. We were involved with the planning application on Dowse Lane, just up the way from where you were before, in Oncott, 2016, for a barn conversion which was for 2 open market dwellings. The applicants really wanted them to be holiday lets, but we were persuaded by the planning officer that the area was saturated with holiday accommodation, so the application was put forward for open market dwellings and approved. So I'm surprised that after only 8 years we're still struggling to change the use of a small holiday let into a full residential use. The proposal to convert Neil's Farm bungalow to a full-time residence would allow the applicant to retain the property and the family and rent it to people in the local area at their discretion. With the current restrictions, my client couldn't even let it out to a relative on a full-time basis. At present, it's been a single bedroom. It will only attract a young couple starting out, or perhaps an older couple, but certainly cannot be considered as a family property. The older couple could not have their grandchildren to stay. The size of the property will only allow for the storage of summer or winter clothes, hence the request to enlarge the property with an additional bedroom.
Having the Peak Park solicitor to vet every potential tenant to see if they meet the criteria and draw up the contract would slow down the process of tenants moving in. The property is likely to be empty for periods of time whilst the process is carried out and is likely to cost Mrs. Kidd at least a month or two rent to pay the solicitor's fees every time the tenant moves on. Core strategies policies DS1 and HC1 against open market dwellings should be considered on an individual basis because it seems they are now working against the reason they were introduced in the first place. Local families for generations still cannot afford to live in the area. Holiday lets intended to support the community isn't supporting the community and community assets are suffering. So with respect, we ask you to pass this permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, there are two issues here, basically. One of them is the design, and the other is the principle of allowing it to be used as something other than a holiday home, i.e. as an open market home or a local occupancy home. That's the issue, isn't it? Yes, well, the speaker, can I just ask the speaker first? What you haven't commented on is the complaint from the report about the design of this bill, the design of what is being proposed and its relationship to the adjoining house. Did you have a comment on that?
Well, the design, if you can go back to the layout, to be fair, of the original floor plan, we did speak with Gareth, the planning officer, and his suggestion was to put it at the end of the kitchen and the bathroom. But that would mean major alterations internally, whereas putting it on the side here doesn't take any alterations to the existing property at all. That window that we've got, which is contentious facing the property, we could quite simply move that, switch the bed round. So that could be an easy solution.
Okay. Right, members. Ken.
How far is the property from the other property? Because I noticed on the picture there weren't any windows on that building.
There is a conservatory there on the right. No.
We don't have a picture.
Just, I'll look it up now if you want to keep going.
Well, if it's less than 21 metres.
Yes, it's a lot less than 21 metres. Sorry, the report says about 10 metres.
Yes, I'm struggling a bit with this. Ken.
Thank you, Chair. As I understand it, our policies allow open market buildings where it's part of the conversion of a traditional farm building as part of its conservation.
Yeah, HC1 allows for market dwellings in principle where it's required to achieve the conservation or enhancement of a heritage asset.
Whereas in this case, the building has already been conserved through its use as a holiday let.
Yeah, and that's a policy principle we've held since the core strategy was adopted, and as far as I'm aware, I've never lost that issue at appeal.
Yeah. So that goes some way for me to resolve that particular issue. I think the other issue that bothers me is the extension, its nature and its location. It is, as Adam outlined, significantly altering the traditional farm building that was there, the character of which has been largely maintained through its conversion to a holiday let. And that character is being completely changed by what is being proposed. I think regardless of whether the window is moved or not, I think it's the proximity between what is proposed and the existing other building is not appropriate in the context of the changes that would occur to the original building. So I think that it's appropriate that this application should be refused, Chair. for the reasons that have been given.
Yes, I'll come back to that. Yes, Brian, you said you wanted to say something. Did Mike, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, it's just, I think there's a lot that the agents mentioned that we accept about the contribution of homes to local community. Within our policies, we've said that should be done through a local needs approach, because that would allow us to satisfy the exceptions that the plan allows for, and allows us to use a local a Section 106 agreement, which then makes the property more affordable in future, which then allows it to contribute more to that community. Quornford is a scattered community. You know, you've got Flash as a very small core, but beyond that, it's recognised that it's actually made up of scattered housing in that area. So it could form part of that community, but far better does that within policy and through a 106 agreement. So that's why we've suggested it'd be better to try and make a case for a local need argument.
But as it stands, it's being proposed as an open market dwelling.
Yeah, all of which I totally agree with. The only thing that worries me about it, this is not exactly a house in the middle of a village. And the market for an open market of a restricted occupancy condition in this part of the world, I suspect is pretty limited. I mean, I'm sure occasionally they would get a letting from somebody.
That's potentially the case.
I mean, and the drive that goes down to this, as we saw on the first slide, is absolutely huge. It's not.
No, but the case was made. If we go back to the creation of our settlement lists in the plan, the very specific case was made by the community of Quornford to include Flash as one of the villages, alongside the scattered nature, and it is different out there. You know, we're not in a nucleated village; we're in a more scattered moorland community. So that was the case made by the community itself, that actually people are living out there, and we should regard it as a community. So it is a bit different to some of the other parts of the national park, but we created policies like this to deal with that kind of more scattered situation. So that's the case I would make.
Mm. I think the parish, by the way, is not Quornford. It may have a Quornford address, but isn't it in Hollinsclough Parish? I'm not sure. Anyway, Rachel. Rachel.
I mean, my question really related to what Brian has just spoken about, which is, could this not be considered as a local needs approach rather than an open market? And my second query really is around, because looking at the front elevation, it's quite clear that it has been a agricultural building previously, and a development to the front elevation doesn't seem appropriate. But have other options been explored, like the rear elevation, the side elevations, for example? That's my comments. Thanks.
Yeah, we heard from the agent that Gareth, the case officer, suggested a lean-to side extension, which could work off either side potentially, and there might also be scope to have what's called a cat slide roof extension off the back, which would be better than the gable to get some more space. So there are possibilities for extensions, just not in the form that's proposed in officer's view.
Right. Martin?
Right. I'm basically for where opportunities exist, moving holiday accommodation towards more permanent accommodation, because that is a way of producing additional accommodation which is needed within the national park. So I'm basically for some sort of movement with this. I just feel that this extension doesn't fit as it is, and would like to see something to see other opportunities explored.
I'm getting a feeling for what members are saying. Has any member got a proposal? Ken?
I'd like to propose that this is deferred for further consultation on the siting of the extension.
Well, that would have to include, I think, some understanding of what we were doing about local occupancy.
Officers did discuss this with the agent specifically to ask if that was a possibility, but the application is for a market dwelling, not an affordable house. That would be a different application. So
Why can't we just approve it as an open market dwelling with the requirement that they sign a Section 106 agreement?
we can do. It would require full reconsultation, so it'd effectively be a different application.
It's not a different use class.
No, but it would have to undergo. It's not a minor change, so it would have to effectively start afresh.
Different policy requirements.
Chair, would it be cleaner to move the recommendation so that we all know where we are, but with the advice that it's not an out-and-out refusal, but that there needs to be some renegotiation? If that was deemed appropriate, I'd be happy to move the
You're
recommendation.
moving that, okay. Are you seconding it? Are there any amendments to that? In that case, all those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? Right. That goes on its way. Okay. Next application we have we got anybody else in the public gallery who... Okay. So we can get back to the agenda. Right, so we'll get on to agenda item 11, which is Furswood Meadow, Fenny Bentley, which we did a site visit for yesterday. Right, who's doing this? Adam?
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this brief. This application has been in for a fair amount of time. I originally proposed the retention of a static caravan and a shipping container on site, which we'll see in some photographs in a minute, and the retention of a track, which has been put in, all without planning permission. The application has now been amended to an agricultural building and undergone reconsultation. And the applicant's been advised that if a case was made for that, that might be acceptable in principle. So you can see there at the bottom of the site, there's an open paddock. This site is just north of Fenny Bentley. So literally as you're going in just past the sign for Fenny Bentley, as you're coming in from the north, you've got this paddock on your left. And the access and the track and the proposed agricultural building is in the southernmost part of that paddock. So they're the plans for the access. There was an access there, but it seems to have been widened. And this track has been put in. And that's the view of that. As you can see, it's been there for a couple of years now, but is a breach of planning control. It doesn't have planning permission. And then you can see in the background a horse box, and behind that there is a shipping container and a static caravan and a vehicle that's been parked there for a while. So that's just a view closer in. And then you see the horse box, the container on the left, and then the static caravan. So this application, sorry for the quality of the drawings, this application is for an agricultural building, and the proposed agricultural use is for growing microgreens, which would be grown inside the building using artificial light. We've had very limited information about the nature of the agricultural business proposed, and there's no evidence that there's anything going on site at the moment. Our policies do in principle support agricultural development, but there has to be a requirement for it to be in a countryside location. And here we've got a fairly intensive agricultural use proposed of growing crops inside of a building using artificial light, and it doesn't seem to have any connection with the land or the land being used for that purpose. So there doesn't appear to be a reason for this building, for this development to take place in the countryside. So in principle, there's an objection to the development. And with that, the erection of a building, the retention of the track would be an unjustified visual intrusion, which would be harmful without that justification, because we do accept portal frame buildings for agriculture where they're related to the management of the landscape. We accept there is some impact from that. That's necessary to manage the landscape, but that wouldn't appear to be the case here, and we've had very limited other information from the applicant. So the application is recommended for refusal for that reason, and also on a technical reason for archaeology, because there's known archaeological interest at that part of the field, and that hasn't been investigated. We haven't got the information we need to understand that. Thank you, Chair.
Well, as I said, we went on a visit yesterday. Mike?
Yes, I'm probably going to continue what you're saying. I think having gone on the site visit yesterday and seeing the situation as it is, and the lack of information which Adam's highlighted in the report, I don't think we've got any option but to to go along with the officer recommendation and
Is that a
refuse
motion?
this.
Is that a proposal?
That's my proposal.
And that's seconded. Rachel?
Just because I'm going to ask about power supply, if there's going to be... There isn't one. Okay, thanks.
Okay. That's been proposed and seconded. Anybody else wish to comment? In that case, all those... Oh, sorry, Ken?
Growing plants under light usually means cannabis.
we worked that out on site yesterday. But we are in public here, of course. Those in favour of refusing on the grounds set out in the report. Those in one against. No, that's carried. Thank you very much. We're now on to John Keeley and the stones in Castleton, agenda item 13. Which is on page 109.
Right, good afternoon, members. This is the application site on the screen before you. It's located towards the south of Castleton Village, off a small side lane called the Stones, which leads west off the marketplace, and it's within the Castleton Conservation Area as well. Just zoomed in here. That's the application site in red. It comprises the building itself, and there's a small area of land on either side. To the east is a small triangular area of hard standing. On the west is a raised terrace you'll see in the ensuing photographs. This is a photograph just to show you the context. It's a little old, it's from 2017, but I think the buildings haven't moved since then. There's the building. So you see the gable from the marketplace. You've got the listed Castleton Hall just hiding behind the trees here, and when you get closer, those listed buildings to the rear of this particular property. So just move a little bit closer. So there's the Stones. This is property at the gable end, and this is the lane which leads up to the Peveril Castle. You can see here two windows. A later inserted window which will be removed as part of the proposals you'll see on the slides, and signs which will be removed as well. It was a former shop, Adventure Equip here, or Safari Equip, I think it was the online business that also operated in connection with these premises. It's been shut now for 6 years, and the owner wishes to convert it to a market dwelling. This is the view from the Stones itself, the frontage. There are some changes here which I'll show on the other plans, but essentially these existing doors here will be changed to windows, with the sill brought up, and the central window changed to a doorway. And you can see again this in this slide and the ensuing slides. The property is of some age, mid-19th century. It is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset, which makes an important contribution to the character of the conservation area. And as a non-designated heritage asset, you'll be aware the conversion to a dwelling would be acceptable in principle, subject to meeting other policy requirements. This, looking back from the west, back towards the marketplace, this is the raised area of terrace. These steps aren't in the application site. And the rear, one of the key, this shows sort of a wider view and a more close view of the relationship between this property and the neighbouring property, which is a listed building. And this is one of the key issues of the change from a shop to a dwelling, is the issue of overlooking, or potential overlooking, between these windows, which are at a slightly higher level than this, just the raised floor. And you'll see in the report we've recommended that these two windows on the rear are obscure glazed to preserve the amenity of this property, and also to prevent overlooking and loss of amenity to the property itself should it gain planning consent. Just looking back the other direction to show the context. And this is the small amenity area which is proposed. At present that's open to the properties opposite and is directly overlooked, and is one of the reasons. This is the view from that across towards Castleton Hall, and you'll see in the report this area here, which is this the only outdoor space really. There is a little triangle here which is potentially to get a small car on, but there is ample parking in the marketplace and down the side street, so there's no concerns about the lack of on-street parking, and there's no objections from the Highway Authority. The key issue of conversion, obviously, firstly is the loss of the shop, which is allowed by our policy because it didn't provide a community facility or service. So for us, the key issue in the conversion to the residential use is the impact on amenity, and we suggested across here that there should be a wall for the outdoor spaces to be provided, along with the obscure glazing. There will be 2 new roof lights here to provide additional light to the accommodation upstairs. And as existing in the layout, simple ground floor shop, upstairs as proposed, sorry, downstairs as proposed. It's an upside down house, 2 bedrooms, and these are the 2 doorways which would be changed to windows, and the window here changed to a doorway. The inappropriate sort of letterbox style opening on the gable end will be infilled. Upstairs, it was sort of office, meeting room and kitchen for the shop, access off the lane. The 2 windows on the end would be improved in appearance. I'll show that in the elevation. Open plan accommodation, and these are the 2 windows which we were suggesting should be fully obscure glazed. And access to this terrace, this raised terrace, bin store, and rather than insert the wall that we've suggested, the agent has come back and surprised us somewhat by, instead of agreeing to the wall, come in with a 1.8 metre high slatted fence rather than a solid stone wall. I'll show you these in the elevation. So that's the elevation to the stones, first and foremost, as existing and as proposed initially. And you'll see we were losing the legibility of the former door opening, so we agreed an amended plan which retains the former stone surrounds where possible and inserts new sills without harming the what we can be left in situ to improve that legibility. So along with new frames, whilst this is slightly regrettable, on balance it's acceptable for the new use. Gable end as existing, as proposed. There is enhancement through subdivision of these windows and giving them proper surrounds, removal of all the signs which enhances. The other elevation as existing, as proposed with improved window frames. And you've got this as originally, sorry, this 1.8 metre high fence rather than a wall. We believe the wall is important because if I just go to that, having a slatted fence just gives some opportunity for noise and intervening sort of feelings of being overlooked, loss of amenity, and also at that scale doesn't sit in harmony with historic buildings. So a wall is something which officers would suggest should be conditioned if members were to approve it. And on the obscure glazing to the rear, the agent has only come back and obscured the lower part of the windows, but somebody of myself and the chair's height would be easy to stand and look out across at the neighbouring property. So again, we suggest that the whole of that window should be obscure glazed in the recommendation amendment to the condition chair. So on that basis, whilst we respect the parish's objection, and we believe that this now accords with policy and with those design amendments is recommended for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just be absolutely clear about whether these dustbins are going to make an important contribution to the conservation area? We are insisting upon a stone wall of a particular height there. Is there anywhere else that they could be put instead?
Other than an internal store, which wouldn't be ideal. No, it's the least obtrusive location there.
It's the only,
with the wall.
Well, it's the only. Is it the only location? That's what I'm trying to establish.
You could put them on the east side, but they would be in full view of the market square.
Well, in that case, do we need a stronger condition about where dustbins are going to be put?
Yes, along with you can suggest that the bin store is retained there throughout the lifetime of the dwelling in that location. And I'm suggesting the condition is tweaked to make sure that we have the stone wall rather than the slatted fence.
I think you're right about the wall, right. On that, oh, we've got somebody wanting to talk to us, haven't we? We've got a statement to be read out.
I would like to commend these plans for Castle Cottage to the committee as the best and most appropriate solution for the future of the property. I have tried to find a practical use for the building that is acceptable and achievable. It's felt at times that this is a contradiction. Everyone seems to have their own ideas about what it should be, or more frequently, negative fears about what might happen if it becomes anything other than an old, empty building. I look through the representations and see in the objections people's desires for a better place to live, less traffic, more parking space, a more permanent and stable community with affordable homes and local shops. I'm sure the committee understands and empathises. I certainly do. There is nothing wrong with the desires except a world that has changed. Castleton didn't evolve with the 21st century in mind. It's what gives it character and why it's protected and visited. Most people travel by car, it's comfortable and convenient, and most people own one. Any use of an old building in Castleton is going to need parking space, no matter whether it's a shop, home, works or community use. This home will be at the low end of parking needs. Traditional retail businesses are being superseded by web businesses. We tried to sell the whole business for just short of 4 years, from June 2014 until March 2018. In the end, we settled for the sale of our web business and closure of the retail. Initially, we used a specialist multinational business marketing company and later a national business specialising in retail. We also used all our own business connections to find a buyer. More recently, we've used Bagshaws of Bakewell for over 18 months to market the empty shop. I totally reject anyone's suggestions that we didn't try to find a buyer for the business or a let for the shop. Castleton evolved when people lived in community. They knew and cared for one another. Sadly, now complaints are made because people seek amenity and privacy just for themselves while denying it to others. Castle Close Cottages owners purchased despite our staff working by the south-facing windows, 7 days a week, all year. Then clear windows and a patio weren't a problem.
Thank you very much. Right, members. I think this is fairly straightforward. I don't know whether anybody has any views on it. Ken?
Just four little items, if I may, Chair. From that plan, I suspect the suggestion for the slatted fence is so that the bins fit in that space without fouling the doorway. I just wonder whether if we, as I think we should, seek a wall, whether it might have to be slimmer than the usual width, if that's the only location for the bins. It's just something for consideration in any negotiation. Paragraph 76, the last line says that Derbyshire County Council Highway Authority raised objections. I think just for the report, that ought to be raised no objections.
That's correct.
Yep. I wasn't clear. It says in paragraph 62, condition to agree the precise detail of a scheme to retain the door jambs, and I wasn't clear where that was in the proposed conditions, Chair. I just, again, if we can be clear about that issue in the proposed conditions.
If I come back, Chair, we've now received that later amended plan which I showed, but also it's covered by condition 6, showing the masonry infill and butt jointing into those openings onto the stones.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. My speed reading skills have obviously failed me. Sorry, John. But finally, Chair, I just wondered whether there needs to be anything about external lighting in the conditions.
That's a good point in relation to the area and the potential for harm to neighbouring amenity if it wasn't carefully cowled just to cover that terraced area. So I think that would be reasonable in the circumstances.
Well, thank you, John.
All right. Ginny? And then Martin?
Yes, just wondered if there was any scope for climate change mitigation.
Sorry, I've not got a full handle on that. So we haven't properly covered that other than in other matters on page 77. It doesn't propose any renewable energy. The sustainable energy statement, in some comments I've heard earlier, paragraph 77, they're limited to low energy fixtures, double glazed windows, new internal insulation as part of the improvement to the performance of the fabric of the building itself. There's limited other opportunities within that fairly enclosed location without potential harm to setting of listed buildings conservation area from other renewable generation facilities. So we thought that was proportionate in the circumstances in this particular case.
Can I go back to Ken's point about the fence and its relationship to the door? That door there's a picture of where the two bins are somewhere. Yeah. His question was whether the wall would have to be narrow. But is it possible to have the bins there and a wall at the same time at all?
I believe it is.
I mean, has it been measured out? I mean, I'm wondering whether, if we emphatically say there has to be a wall, and it turns out that it's impracticable, what do we do? I mean, do you understand the point I'm making?
Yes, I think we can start off with a wall. Walls can be built and reinforced and be a single skin if necessary. It looks to me on the plan there is space to achieve bin storage there, and that is the only real practical space without them being on the east side, which would be
which
on
you need to
view.
prevent. That's my
Obviously
point.
they'd be taken down the driveway and put there as a bin dwell area for collection.
You probably see, if that's their only open space, they won't want to have their barbecue in the evening right beside the dustbins, will they? I mean,
there can be, within the site, on the other side of the wall, they can be screened by various techniques from an aesthetic point of view for the owner. No doubt they'll do that, but we wouldn't seek to control that level of detail.
Right. So picking up the points then, is it a condition requiring a wall we need, or is it a condition requiring the boundary treatment to be approved so that we get it right?
If we submit and agree the boundary treatment, it gives us that flexibility to do those checks you've outlined.
So we want the boundary treatment of that area to be agreed. We want the bins to be kept there and nowhere else. We want a lighting condition. Was anybody got anything else? No.
I think also just picking up the point that Ken Smith made about CC1, although there's measures within there, we haven't got a condition that agrees the precise detail of that of that scheme.
Of what was that? Sorry.
And the clear delivery of those sustainability measures.
Okay. Those four things, subject to those four changes, I'm happy to move this from the chair. Is that seconded? That's seconded. All those in favour? Anyone against? Okay, thanks very much indeed. Oh. No one's happy to go past 1 o'clock. Will you all agree to go past 1 o'clock? Yes, about 1:30. Should we make it at about 8 minutes past by that clock? start again. Okay. It's a little bit earlier than I thought, but we will start now with deal with the Fulo application, agenda item 15, Long Lane Fulo, change of use from ancillary accommodation to a holiday accommodation. And John, you're dealing with this.
It is me again, yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a context slide to show you where Watergrove is in relation to surrounding features. So you've got the property arrowed here. This is the A623, the main road from Stony Middleton up towards the Tideswell Junction.
Well, my report.
Mine goes from page 170, then the map, and then to page 183.
Well, I was about to say I don't have page 183, but I find I do. Mine all fell apart. Do we have a do we need to we need to give Mike 5 minutes to, I think the issues here, Mike, are very simple. First of all, you must have your report, but the issues are very simple. If we give you, if we give you 5 minutes, or are you happy for us to continue? Or okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Right, having heard that, you need to be a bit clear about what the issues are.
Yes, I think for Mike's benefit, the slides will illustrate the key issues very clearly and the setting of the property for you. So, as I was saying, this is day 623. Brosterfield Farm, members will be aware, that's the caravan site, so that locates it. And this lane here is the lane south towards Monsall, the Longston Edge and the Cavendish Mill sort of turn-offs. What you won't see, and you'll see in the photographs, it's a private dwelling with a small stable in the front. Very well landscaped, you'll see when we get to the photographs, such that although it's sited next to a very busy and prominent main road, most of us here will have never seen the property itself because of that landscaping. This is zoomed in, so the application concerns this small former stable building in the front. It was built in 1980, I believe, and has since been converted to an ancillary dependent relative unit in association with the house. The owners no longer need it now and wish to convert it to holiday accommodation. There's ample parking within the site for the house and the current and proposed use. So there's no change to that. And as it's already in use for ancillary accommodation, there's no external changes either. So this is the house. This is a Grade 2 listed building. You can start to see some of the extensive landscaping. And this is the application building. There's a terrace in front which was added later. It's of no merit whatsoever. It's totally different to this. It's constructed from the concrete and limestone Davy blocks and has a concrete tile roof. And in some respects, does detract from the setting of this listed building. But nevertheless, was there, and it provided a very useful family facility. That's the little terrace which faces into the garden. You can just see the access behind, and you can see the very high hedges around which screen it from the highway. This is from the side, the driveway side, showing the parking and turning area. Just show you the character of the building. So, in terms of the layout, it provides 2-bedroom accommodation at the moment. There's no changes to that. In the elevation terms, there's no need for any changes to the elevation. The only change in this is the type of occupation of the existing building. But you'll note from the report, our policies, as this is a modern structure, built mainly of concrete, so of no merit, and our policies only support conversions of what we call heritage assets. The main policy, RT2, in the core strategy says, for the provision of self-catering accommodation, that proposals must conform to a set of principles which include the change of use of a traditional building of historic or vernacular merit. And you can see that this isn't that. Since the core strategy, we've moved on, and the language we use now is effectively heritage assets, with the same as traditional buildings of vernacular merit. This building clearly isn't of any great merit, but it does exist. And therefore it doesn't comply with our policy, and this is the sole reason for refusal from your officers. We note in the supporting text to the development management policies, which were the later policies, that in relation to buildings like or conversions like this, the supporting text states that in the national park, the majority of traditional buildings which may be identified for conversion to new users are likely to be non-designated heritage assets, with a much smaller proportion being designated assets like listed buildings. And it goes on to say that there are other lower quality or rudimentary buildings which may be subject to applications for conversion, like this one. The DM says that it's anticipated that such buildings will rarely be worthy of conversion to higher intensity uses, and as such will not normally be permitted, and that any approval of such buildings will only be permitted by way of exception when they show the types of qualities that justify their survival, or they deliver a sustainable outcome. In this case, the building is quite remote, so it's not a sustainable location. I understand the nearest bus stop is some 800 metres away. It's a very busy main road through the national park. And therefore, approval of this, in officers' view, would divert resources away from the aim of policy to really conserve and convert our traditional buildings, which we value, and which would then further and preserve the special qualities of the national park. So, despite no change and no harm, no concern about highway or amenity issues, the recommendation is one of refusal, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, right, a statement to be read out by the applicant, I think it is.
We are not seeking to make any material changes to the property. Our planning application merely seeks a change of use. Due to personal circumstances, the annex that has previously served as accommodation for a disabled relative now sits empty most of the time. We have been made aware that our planning application would not be supported for a change of use due to a technicality in planning policy RT2A, as it is not deemed to be a traditional building, as it is a C20 Davy block and concrete tiled dwelling. If this in principle policy issue is the only reason this change of use cannot be considered, it is a travesty. Below is a list of pros and cons in relation to our application. Cons. Policy RT2A only permits change of use for traditional buildings. Pros. Existing ancillary accommodation for disabled relatives will remain in ancillary with flexibility to contribute towards tourism by offering a short-term holiday let option. Disabled access and facilities in holiday lets are sought after or non-existent. Sympathetically converted building to previous planning approval within the grounds and setting of a listed building, therefore the building is of historical merit. No objections from local residents, no objections from statutory consultees, no physical changes and no visual impact whatsoever. No access issues on the A623, no parking issues, ample parking for at least 6 cars. No neighbouring properties, and support by local residents and disabled climbing charity. In the overall planning balance, the benefits far outweigh the minor technical policy conflict, and the application should be approved. Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Everett.
Thank you. Well, members, I have to confess I'm having some difficulty with this. I started off reading the report and thinking, where is the public benefit in refusing this? I mean, it's an existing building. It's used for living in at the moment. It'll be used for living in again in the future for a different type of living. And then you start to go into the policies. And at the top of page 177, it gives us one policy, which is policy DS1C. And that tells us that the provision or change of use of development of buildings in the countryside for visitor accommodation will be approved, preferably by use of traditional buildings. It doesn't say solely by use of traditional buildings. It says preferably by use of traditional buildings. If you then read policy RT2, it says we will approve holiday accommodation in traditional buildings, but it actually doesn't say that we won't approve holiday accommodation in non-traditional buildings. So that puts me in the position really of not really understanding where the policy benefits are or how we are materially departing from any policy that we have. One could go on and point out, for example, that in an appeal we had in Ashford in the Water about 3 years ago, a 1920s barn was said by the inspector of the time not to fit the definition of traditional set down in this paper, but it was of a traditional type. And therefore, as far as he was concerned, he couldn't see any harm in approving it. So we do have a sort of series of conflicting things here, which I'm having some difficulty with. And my bottom line is, where on earth is the benefit of refusing this application? I don't see it. Matt.
Yeah, that was what I thought when I read it as well. Surely the only benefit for this would be that we tell them they need to knock it down because of the impact that it has on the listed building. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there and be an empty building when there are other properties which are going to be converted into holiday cottages instead of this one.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Ken?
Actually, I think this is going to be a valuable asset because it's disabled compliant. It's been designed for a disabled person. And a combination like that is hard to find anywhere in mind, just in Peak District. Because of its location, nobody else in the will know what it's being used for. It's not distracting from it all.
Okay. Anybody else wish to contribute? Martin?
Well, driving past this site most days, in that it's including coming here today, it's well hidden. It's part of the landscape, and I can't see the the benefits in National Park of leaving this building unused, and it looks suitable for holiday accommodation.
May I move from the chair that this be approved? Have you got any suggested conditions?
Yes, Chair. I anticipated the fine balance in this case. I also should just apologise. There was a further letter of support which I didn't report at the beginning, which contributes to the already support set out in the report. The suggested condition would be a standard time limit in accordance with the submitted approved plans, or in accordance with specified approved plans. Third one would be because it's already in ancillary use, we could have a situation by either or continuing that use and or holiday accommodation. So we'd have accommodation to be ancillary to the main dwelling, occupied by members of the family, or a short-term holiday let, and both to be maintained as a single planning unit. And in respect to the holiday use, our standard 28-day occupancy restriction in any calendar year, and keeping the register to help with monitoring and enforcement. Thank you.
Bearing in mind that holiday use is slightly different from old persons' uses, would you need anything for outside lighting or other outside activity?
I believe that's already in place, Chair. I think
no,
you can see the lighting already there.
Fine.
And
okay. Well, on that, I've moved it on that basis. Is that seconded by anybody? I've got that seconded by 3 people. That's good. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. At which point we invite Tom to come back again. I'm sorry, Tom, you've been waiting so long, but...
That's okay, Chair.
Right. The Minerals Monitoring Report, 2016 to 23. That's 7 years.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is quite a considerable period of time. I think we're supposed...
I think it's the first one I've had.
Is it? Well, yes, first one I've done, and I've been here 3 years. Yeah, I think that it's something which is supposed to be done sort of annually, but we've sort of moved away from that.
This is a 7-year itch.
It's a 7-year itch, yeah. Members may remember the last committee, there was a wider policy monitoring report which was produced, and as is often the case with minerals, we get forgotten about. So I'm just here to sort of update it in terms of trying to assess how our policies are performing. Then also, you'll see in the report, there's sort of a general statement of progress of some of the things we've been working on. Members will be pleased to know I'm not intending to go through everything that we're working on. I know it's been a long agenda today. So if you've got questions as I go through it, you can ask. But if you want to wait and discuss it with me over lunch, that's also fine. How do I move it on? Is it this one? There we are. Okay, so I've pretty much done the introduction already. So the core strategy policies relevant to minerals, obviously Min 1, minerals development, Min 2, fluorspar proposals, Min 3, small scale building and roofing stone, and Min 4 is the minerals safeguarding areas. Okay, so Min 1, first of all, as members will be aware, seeks to limit mineral extraction other than in exceptional circumstances. No new consents have been issued for aggregate consents. So aggregates is your real big scale sites, construction materials. And the policy has been relatively successful in that. There's been no consents for aggregate extraction during the monitoring period. There has been 2 consents under this policy for building stone, however. Those were at New Pillough and at Dale View. So the impact of those sites, nothing like the big aggregate sites, but they're sites which aren't restricted by the local provision for building stone like Min 3 is.
So just remind me where Dale View is, sorry.
It's that Stanton Moor.
Stanton Moor, okay.
So it near enough connects with New Pillough, they back onto one another. So general assessment that the policy is working relatively effectively. Oops, I keep clicking the wrong thing here. Just a picture, just to brighten it up a little bit. This is Old Moor Quarry, so this is probably the biggest between Old Moor and Hope, the limestone quarry at Hope. This is probably one of the biggest we've got in the park. So the bulk of our aggregate reserves are within this site. So it provides construction aggregates, but also industrial grade limestone. You might be able to see in the background, there's the adjoining Tunstead Quarry, which is in Derbyshire County Council Mineral Planning Authority area, and their cement plant. So Min 2 is about fluorspar. It seeks to prevent open cast fluorspar extraction, but does allow underground working. No new consents have been issued for open cast fluorspar, so that's good news. Restoration and aftercare of the former open cast sites is ongoing. So policy working well. This one here is just to show Arthurton West. It's a restored site. It's on Longston Edge. So that was previously open cast. It's been backfilled and restored. It's now out of its aftercare. So that's some of the success you can have, sort of restoring the landscape. Min 3, the small scale building stone policy. 1 permission has been granted during this monitoring period under this policy, and it was at Chinley Moor. The provision of limestone under this policy, generally from once a week quarry, has worked relatively well, supplying developments here in Bakewell. The provision of gritstone for local purposes perhaps hasn't worked quite so well. You've got Bretton Moor quarry by Hucklow, which was permitted really for stone roofing slates, but the quality of the deposit hasn't proved really that viable for that purpose. The stone is quite fractured. They're generally using it for just people's garden walls. So it's perhaps not performing the function we'd like it to. Chinley Moor, again, is a very small scale site, not really providing that provision. So much of the building stone used in the park comes from non-Min 3 sites at the moment, like your Dale View, New Pillough, Stoke Hall. The former 2 are coming towards the end of their life. So it's something we probably need to think about in the local plan review, about how we can meet our needs for building stone, whether that is through, you know, restricted small scale sites or potentially allowing, although they're not of the scale of the aggregate sites, slightly larger building stone sites, which could potentially provide in to markets inside and outside the park. So that's something to consider as we go forward. And yeah, there's a noticeable shortage of gritstone roofing slates, particularly for heritage projects, with sort of old buildings being ransacked to be used on others. So it's, where do we want to go in policy terms? Do we want to be insisting on this because it's the local vernacular? And if we do, we need to think about how we can provide it. Another picture then, Chinley Moor. Again, this is one of the Min 3 sites, so it's very, very small scale. This area has been worked previously and there's no longer consent to work there now. The actual consent is sort of this batter here, if you like, which goes back not a great distance. Much of the materials used for sills and plinths and hand finished on site. So it doesn't really give you the quantities for any major building projects. So that's why it's something we need to consider, I think. Min 4 is mineral safeguarding. This is to prevent sort of major development sterilising mineral, or in instances where you might want to permit something, you'd prior extract the mineral first. Given the level of development in the park, it's not something we need to be too concerned about, but the MPPF requires safeguarding areas to be mapped, and we've done so. Policy's working well. Did you have a question, Kath?
Yes. I remember the Eldon Hill debacle, when it was in 1998. They had 2 consents. One finished September, the end of September that year, and the other one finished the end of December that year. And I just wonder how many more are there under the 100-year consents still operating, and what work is being done to gradually close them down to conform to that ruling?
Yeah, thanks, Kath. So I think you're talking about the Environment Act in 95 and the Minerals Act at 81. It imposed periodic review legislation. So any quarry which is operating now has undergone a review. So it's got modern conditions to it, and it's got a new end date imposed either by us or by statute, which is 2042. So there's a couple of dormant consents in the park still. So dormant means it's technically got a planning permission, but it can't operate until it's put in a scheme of... until it's put in an application to agree conditions with full environmental impact assessment. Whether they come forward, I think, is probably unlikely, but if they do, then we have the option to control. Anything which is operating now is well governed. Well, thank you, Kath. I mean, I've only been here 3 years, so I can't take all the credit, but yeah. Yeah, it's good news, yeah. Yeah, it's good, yeah. I know. Yeah, yeah, it's good. Okay. I'm coming towards the end, which members will be pleased to know. So just statement of progress. I won't go through everything, but just to mention that we've approved a couple of reviews. So the ROMPS, Review of Old Mineral Permission, one at Old Moor and one at Below. So Below is an extension to Doveholes Quarry. We can't refuse these. It's the periodic review process I just mentioned. It's about agreeing a scheme of conditions. So that scheme at Below has released 33 million tonnes of aggregate, which obviously is a lot. It will have some impact on the landscape, but it has obviously the positive effect of boosting our land bank, which means we're not susceptible to speculative applications elsewhere. So that's good news. Importation of alternative raw materials to Hope Works, I think it was a couple of years ago now, the committee approved that one. Milldam Mine and Cavendish Mill ceased to operate in July of last year. The company's now in liquidation and an official receiver has been appointed. So we'll be chasing them for some some fees where due for monitoring, and also to ensure compliance with the outstanding requirements of some of their planning permissions.
Will that cover the recovery of the entrance area in the village on the entrance into Hucklow?
Do you mean the portal to Milldown Mine?
Yeah.
Yes, we've served an enforcement notice on that already, so we're pursuing that, Chair.
Oh, have you? Right, okay.
Yeah.
With Milldown Mine, is any progress being made with the problems with the collapses along the edge?
Yes, thank you, Martin. Yes, there is. It's been a long process, but the access track has now been put in. So crush and run surface has gone in, and one of the sinkholes has been, certainly when I went out last month, 3/4 of the way backfilled. So they still have some work to do on the others, but progress has been made. We've approved a GPDO to allow that work to happen. So we're confident it's going in the right direction.
Yes, because I'm told that it's dangerous to go anywhere near it, that the remaining building remnants of Silence Mine are disappearing down one of the sinkholes.
Yeah, with regret, I think it's likely that that heritage asset will be lost. It is still there at the moment, and perhaps we might be able to retain some of it, but yeah, it's in a sorry state really, and the sinkholes are considerable. We've worked to try and resolve matters as quickly as possible, but there was an offer on the table from the company to conduct the remediation works while they were still liquid. But there was difficulties with the landowner, and perhaps a little bit of mistrust and things there, and gaining access as well with a third party landowner. So it slowed things down a little bit, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is, and we're on the case.
Thanks a lot.
As a matter of interest, with something like that, where the mineral rights are actually owned by, I'm going to guess, the trustees of the Chatsworth Estate or something originally, when that company goes bust, do they have some obligations?
No, aggressively.
No. Okay. Right. Is that your report?
Almost, yeah. Restoration and aftercare ongoing, 8 sites. We served a temporary stop notice at Wages Flat to prevent further unauthorised quarrying. And then Mossrake East has been restored under direct action in 2017. That concludes the report. Thank you, Chair.
Very much indeed. Members, any questions or comments? No, it's Ken.
Just to commend Tom for the statement of progress. It is really useful, and it's unfortunate that you were forgotten in last week's the earlier update. But I think we can look forward to further updates in future at regular intervals.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can I move that we note the report? All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's noted. Thank you very much indeed. And we then have the legal reports, the appeals pending, appeals decided. Crestbrook Hall was a bit disappointing. Marquis was a bit mixed, but generally on the positive side. And I don't think any other real... There might be a lesson or two out of the Chinley one, I don't know. But those are the appeals. Anybody else want to draw any attention to anything there? No? Can I move that the appeals report be noted? That's all agreed? Good, thank you very much. There's nothing else on the agenda. Can I leave you with the comforting thought that after today, Angela Rayner will only have 1,499,998 houses still to find.